This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. All right, we've got some sponsors for the pod now.
Wait, what?
Every link you need for the things we talk about here is at artofdarkpod.com/sponsors. First up, books.
If you're into this podcast, odds are you're probably a reader. We've got links to buy new books from bookshop.org and used books from alibris.com.
And if you want to listen to your books, we recommend and use audible.com.
It's great, and the catalog is huge.
All right. So if you're listening to this, you are online.
Maybe you're very online.
You probably have a website or are thinking of starting one. Maybe you want a website like artofdarkpod.com. We built that with WordPress, which is by far the most popular way to create websites. And the single best host for serious WordPress is WP Engine. I've personally used them for over a decade now, and I don't host my websites anywhere else. Go to artofdarkpod.com/sponsors and click on the WP Engine link to learn more.
Finally, the best way to support the show is at patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Get the bonus After Dark content for every episode, access to the book club, and more.
All right, so we're gonna read a little bit about dreams of fair to middling women, and then we're coming up to a major inflection point.
Okay,
and then I feel like we're making good time. We're gonna bring this in a good amount of time. There's so much to cover. This is one of those episodes where, boy, Brad, I hope you stay entertained this whole time. I hope the audience is with us. I hope you're ready for Patreon. I've got some good stuff for that. Patreon.com/artofdarkpod for the After Dark. And for these core episodes, we always try to give like a definitive primer into any subject we cover. So these go long. There is a lot. We could do an entire entire 3-season podcast about Beckett. And sure, you could do an entire podcast. So in any case, we cover
right,
as
and
much
then
as
going
we can.
into all of the ins and outs of every part of his life, and of course. So these are trying to find that middle ground between reading a full biography and something that's enjoyable to listen to for a few hours.
So this is a little bit about Dream of Fair to Middling Women. It deals with the experiences, ideas, and inner life of a young man called Belacqua, who is named after the waiting figure in Dante's Purgatorio. The structure of the novel is complex and fragmented. Its plot deliberately lacks linear form and unity. The only unity in this story is, please God, and an involuntary unity, says the narrator in the novel. And its surface reality is quite consciously distorted. It's been labeled picaresque and episodic, but neither term does justice to the book's deliberate lack of coherence, let alone its verbal extravagance and stylistic bravura. Can't imagine why this didn't get published until 1992.
Oh, yeah. Some nameless writer throws this across your desk. Yeah, man. Print 5,000 now.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah. Beckett was a very clever young man and was very aware of this fact. So there is a lot of showing off in the novel. And it's so important that we cover this so we can contrast to the great work later and how.
Well, this is what's interesting is the guy you're painting is not the guy in my head of Samuel Beckett. Samuel Beckett in my head is very kind of like almost like monk-like and taciturn and extremely sort of cerebral, like almost to the point in my head. Beckett is this guy who's like trying to figure, he's almost like a character out of a Borges story, and that he's like writing, and he's really, what he's trying to do is like get to the point where he can write a play or a story that is literally a blank page. That's my image of Beckett. And this guy he's like an actual guy. It's like
good.
It's like a real person. So
he was an actual guy. Yeah, he was like a red-blooded Irish dude.
He's got love affairs and drinks too much and drives a car like crazy and he's got problems with his mom. Yeah.
Yeah, good. I'm glad we can be doing that. Yeah. So this is what a reviewer says about Dream of Fair to Middling Women in 1992. To cope with this book, you will need some French and German. And then the author of this book says he could have added Italian, Spanish, and Latin. A resident exegete of Dante, a good encyclopedia, the Oxford English Dictionary, the patience of Job, and your wits about you. What in addition to company they would be? It's uphill all the way, but then so is cavalry, and the view from the top redeems the pains taken.
Okay. Wow, that's a review. If anybody, if you get a review of something though, in the first sentence they're telling you to cope with this work.
Yeah. All right. So the three main female characters are capital divas, the narrator calls them, correspond fairly closely to the three women who had figured in Beckett's life up to that time. The first mentioned, the Smeraldina Rima, Smerry for short, is based on Peggy, which we've covered. And then
Very
it goes on about
very Joycean name.
Oh, is it?
Well, yeah. What was it? Smegardina?
It's Smeraldina Rima.
Yeah, that's a Joyce. That's a Joyce name for sure.
Yeah. So let's see here. What seems to be a description of Peggy in repose is used to illustrate the clash between the image of chaste, idealized spiritual love extolled by the medieval troubadour. We can think of Dante, and the lascivious, tempting young woman making her own demands while still imposing her own conditions and erupting with somewhat grotesque reality into his pure, still world. It's from the book. So she had been sad and still, without limbs or paps, in a great stillness of body that summer evening in the green aisle when first she heaved his soul from its hinges, as quiet as a tree column of quiet. Pinus puella quandam fuit, alas fuit. So he would always have her be wrapped like the spirit of a troubadour, casting no shade, herself shade, instead of which, of course, it was only a question of seconds before she would surge up at him, blithe and buxom and young and lusty, a lascivious, petulant virgin, a generous mare neighing after a great horse, caterwauling after a great stallion, and amorously lay open the double jug dugs. She could not hold it. Nobody can hold it. Nobody can live here and hold it. Only the spirit of the troubadour, wrapped in a niche of rock, huddled and withdrawn forever if no prayers go up for him, recolta a se, like a lion. It's very erotic and intense,
passionate,
and
kind of fiery.
Young. Then there's a second woman named the Syracusa. There's saying it might be Lucia Joyce. And there's a third woman, and then I think it's the Alba, and they think that is Ethna McCarthy. So he hasn't met his wife yet, but he's written a sort of an experimental novel about the women in his life, and why not?
Yeah, sure. I'm sure they were all happy to be included.
Well, right, and it may have served him that it wasn't actually published in his lifetime. It's one of those. Yeah. All right. So let's see. I've got a little bit now. We're getting into 1932. He sort of like there. I want to say there is like a reconciliation with Joyce. He it isn't like this permanent, cut. So here's what I have. So I want to track that. The friendship between Beckett and Joyce resumed in the first few weeks of 1932. Although Beckett went round less often now to the Joyce apartment so as not to upset Lucia, he met her father again for their regular Sunday morning walks. He also used to dine or drink with Joyce, sometimes in the company of McGreevy, in some of Joyce's favorite cafes and restaurants.
Joyce had to have some understanding eventually when tempers cooled that Lucia's kind of a bit.
Yeah. I feel like you would do that for you'd make a show of it for your daughter, but then at a certain point you might have to go, this is a very interesting piece. Beckett was closely involved in both the sad and joyful moments in Joyce's life. The writer's father, John Joyce, died on December 29th of 1931. Joyce was grief-stricken. He wrote to Harriet Shaw Weaver that it is not his death that crushed me so much, but self-accusation. Weeks had passed, he said, in prostration of mind, for he felt bitter regret that he had never returned to Ireland to see his father before he died. This sadness and remorse used to creep into his conversation with Beckett. Joyce's deep sadness was broken by the birth of his grandson, Stephen Joyce. In Joyce's mind, the proximity of time of the birth to his father's death brought the two events into a close alliance, new life counterbalancing death. And it was on the day that Stephen was born that he wrote one of the most beautiful, his most beautiful and moving poems, Ecce Puer. This poem celebrated his grandson's birth, but also acknowledged the remorse that he felt at having forsaken his father. Beckett took a keen interest in the poem when Joyce either showed it or recited it to him. The last two lines, "O Father forsaken, forgive your son," epitomized for Beckett too his own feelings of remorse at having forsaken his family and, in his mind, let his father down so badly by resigning from his post at Trinity. He knew the poem by heart in a version of his own, and revealingly, in his 83rd year, so near the end of his own life, when speaking of the remorse that he still felt, more than 50 years after resigning from Trinity, he began to recite part of it aloud, unprompted, just as he remembered it. And this is the poem. New life is breathed upon the glass. That which was not has come to pass. A child is born, an old man gone. Father forsaken, forgive thy son.
Wow. Yeah.
There's
I like that. There's no tricks to that. That's just a real heartfelt, strong image poem. Yeah. You could put it to music or something. Yeah.
All right. So we're coming up to a major milestone here that I'm almost considering sort of like the midpoint, and then I'll blast through some stuff. Paul Doumer, the French president, was assassinated on May 7th, 1932. They didn't teach me that in U.S. public schools.
I never heard
by
about
a white Russian fanatic, Paul Gorgolov. As a result, the authorities decided to check the papers of all foreigners living in Paris. Since Beckett did not possess a valid carte de séjour, he was forced to leave his hotel, and as he could not legitimately register anywhere else, he spent a few nights sleeping in Jean Locat's studio floor. But he had to leave the country. Having little money, he called around to see Edward Titus and persuaded him to buy his English translation of Arthur Rimbaud's poem Le Bateau Ivre. Beckett asked him for 1,000 francs for the translation. In the end, he received 700 or 800 francs for the poem, which gave him just enough to finance a short stay in England. Jeez, if only. Here, please buy this translation of my poem so I can go hang out in London.
Okay.
So he's, sure. Different times.
Yeah, for sure. That gets you about $5 nowadays.
Wouldn't get you. No. Get you fucking blocked.
Yeah, right.
Get you reported.
Right.
Well, in any case, so he goes to London, and he's he's hanging out in London and getting to know that town. He would ultimately spend a great deal in town here. He wandered alone into St. Paul's Cathedral, but found it hideous. So he promptly left and walked around the outside of the Tower of London and sat on the wharf watching the little steamers dip their funnels as they went under Tower Bridge, and the two sections of the bridge being open to allow a bigger boat to pass through. So he was just miserable in London. He wasn't able to work, went to the zoo. He hated zoos. Which I relate to. I kind of hate zoos too. Yeah.
Does he hate zoos before he went to the zoo, or was it one of these? It's like, I'm just going to go do something I hate. Yeah, that's funny.
So listen to this. By the third week in August, he had run out of both cash and willpower. This month of creeping and crawling and solicitation has yielded nothing but glib Cockney regrets, he wrote. And you can't overstate the bigotry of the English toward the Irish. He would go to pubs. He really disliked, they'd call you Paddy. Patty or Pat. God. You go to the
Right.
pub. I mean,
Right.
yeah. I mean, he's one of the most intelligent people alive. I mean, he just would probably drive him nuts. Neither the Spectator nor the New Statesman could offer him books for review, although, as he said, they must have had some. And any teaching posts that the agency offered him did not tempt him in the slightest. The little self-confidence that he had briefly assumed had been completely destroyed as he received Dream and the poems back from Hogarth Press. Prentice also returned his poems from Chatto and Windus, thought of by Beckett now as Shatten and Wind Up. Shat on and wind up. That's the kind of guy he is.
Yeah.
With a note saying that they were a new and strange experience, and if only he could escort me on longer flights. So sorry. Very, very sorry. Oh, there's nothing like a warm rejection letter. Yeah. Edward Garnett read the novel for Jonathan Cape while he was on holiday in Land's End, reporting privately, I wouldn't touch this with a barge pole. Beckett probably is a clever fellow, but here he has elaborated a slavish and rather incoherent imitation of Joyce, most eccentric in language and full of disgustingly affected passages, also indecent. This school is damned, and you wouldn't sell the book even on its title. Chatto was right to turn it down.
Wow.
And I think that's more pricks than kicks. It might be the other one, but in any case. To upset him even more, Beckett heard from Rudmose Brown that Ethna McCarthy had taken Con Leventhal under her wing, where he snuggles up for dear death. His morale reached rock bottom when a last 5-pound note sent to him by his father was stolen from his room, probably by a temporary lodger at Mrs. Southern's. Reluctantly, he was forced to write to ask his parents to send him his fare to Dublin. I crawled home with my tail between my legs.
Yeah.
So now he has to go back to Dublin.
Prodigal son. I mean, you know, he left his post at, Yep.
And there's a little bit about his health problems. I just want to give an impression of this because I do feel like this impacts some of his work, and like the fact that I don't know, again, like we have to remember that the guy who writes that horoscope in an afternoon and who speaks 3-4 languages and who is doing this sort of Joycean riff, like is most remembered for his plays. And if there's anything that's true about writing plays, is that it's words embodied, words put into flesh. Right. And so I just want to read this. Health problems bothered him constantly. Eventually, he worked himself up to consult a doctor about a painful cyst that had developed on his neck. This was diagnosed as a deep-seated septic cystic system.
Ooh.
Yuck.
That's a Joycean phrase right there.
That's like a warm-up. That's tough for me. A deep-seated septic cystic system. It sounds like friggin' it's a warm-up or it sounds like Dr. Seuss.
Yeah.
Beckett preferring the alliteration to the diagnosis. Me too.
Yeah. So many sympathetic symptoms you can hardly list.
Having a deep-seated septic cystic system like in your neck, that does not sound good, dude. No. He was advised to have an operation in order, or so he was assured, to clear up the trouble once and for all. So he was operated on. About this, he said, I have an agreeable room full of sun all morning. Oh, and they also operated on his hammer toe. That's what it was called. I don't know what a hammer toe is. We can look it up. Yeah, we always got to look up diseases.
Hammer toe. Yeah.
Here's what he said. I have an agreeable room full of sun all morning, and it is pleasant enough lying in bed, sleeping and reading and feeling vaguely spoilt and victimized and comic all at the same time. All in a hail of vitamins and iron and arsenic injections. At a time when there were no antibiotics, these injections, administered in the buttocks as there was insufficient muscle in his arm, were intended to improve the anemic state of his blood, which was, he had been told, a disgrace. So what's a hammer toe?
So a hammer toe occurs when there is a muscle imbalance around the toe joint. This causes the toe to get stiff and bent in a hammer-like position. Condition can affect any toe, but it usually affects one of the middle 3 toes. So it sounds like what it does is it's like the toe stiffens and coils up, and so you're walking around. You can sort of like make a little fist with your toes. You imagine that the big toe is constantly bent under itself. So it'd be painful to walk around, and yeah, I can imagine it being pretty painful.
Yeah. All right, Brad, I got to stand up for 90 seconds. We're going to come back. We're coming right to a major moment here in the life of Beckett. There's going to be some tragedy. There's going to be other exciting stuff. We're going to get him into the French Resistance. We're going to have him permanently ensconced in Paris, and then we're going to be getting to the work. But in the meantime, while I stand up for 90 seconds, why don't you tease the remainder of our season?
Sure.
What do we have here in season 3 of Art of Darkness?
Yeah.
And then sort of tell people about maybe a little bit about what's coming season 4.
Sure. Yeah. So remaining on the year, we've got Edgar Allan Poe. I'm going to be doing an Edgar Allan Poe episode here in a couple of weeks. Depending on when you're listening to this, it might already be out, which is going to be very, very interesting, I think. We're following that up with an episode on Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. I'll be then doing an episode on James Hampton, who's a sort of an outsider artist who was building a visionary garbage sculpture in a storage unit that nobody knew about until after he died. So it should be a pretty interesting kind of left turn in our subject matter. Who else? We've got Hermann Hesse, Nina Simone, John Lennon, and that kind of takes us to the end of the year. I might be missing one in there, but that takes us to the end of season 3. Been a big season for us, and thanks for joining us if you've been following along. As we get into next year, a couple people that we might be couple people that we will be covering. First, we're going to start off with the official William S. Burroughs episode. For people who've been listening for a while, you might know that our first episode was on William S. Burroughs, the American novelist. But we didn't really know what we were doing back then. And so while that episode is an enjoyable listen, it's not the full Art of Darkness treatment. And we've decided that we need to do it properly. So that should be pretty interesting. Trying to think of who else we're doing
I think that's fine.
4.
I think you did a good job. So, don't forget, we've got for Patreon. I'm going to say the URL one more time, patreon.com/artofdarkpod. We have the book club Blood Meridian event in December with the great Aaron Gwynn. And we've got a full book club planned for next year. We're going to read 6 books. Yeah. Everybody can join us on Zoom. If you don't want to join us, you can always listen back to it on Patreon. Whether or not you want the Patreon stuff, the extra content, I really hope you would consider supporting this podcast just based on the merit of the core episodes alone. That's really what we're here to do. We love doing it. We try to do it truly like with all humility. Like I'm a playwright. Brad's a novelist. We are not playwrights and novelists of the stature of someone like Beckett. Partly we are trying to understand the life and the thinking and the process. And we're genuinely curious about this stuff. Again, not like in an academic way. There's, we like the academic side of it too. We're very interested in sort of like thoughts and the ideas. And Beckett really is as much a philosopher as a literary figure. I think you'll come to see. But in any case, we love doing it. And we really appreciate all our listeners, whether you can support us materially or not. Find us on Twitter, x.com/artofdarkpod. The Telegram's a lot of fun. Get in there, t.me/artofdarkpod. We love hearing from people. Awesome. All right. Yeah. Okay, here we go. So we're kind of arriving at what I think is kind of the midpoint, but maybe we'll call it, here we go. So on May 3rd of 1933, Beckett had to have the cyst on his neck lanced once again under a local anesthetic this time. The incision was stitched but separated for several days into the fomentations that his mother applied regularly with loving care. Those days were spent in bed. It was as he was lying there at a low ebb that he was shocked to learn that his cousin and former lover, Peggy, had died of tuberculosis.
Oh, geez.
In Bad Wildungen, I can do better than Bad Wildungen Hospital in the early hours of the day of his operation.
Wow.
Peggy, he was told, had died peacefully after a fit of coughing that followed the administrations of a sleeping potion. Her death was not at all expected by the family. Only days before, she had been back to Castle to see a doctor who had told her that she was much better and could venture to lie out in the sun. As a result, she and her fiancé had been making optimistic plans for their marriage. The fiancé was inconsolable.
Yeah.
Beckett was horrified and depressed by Peggy's death. He thought with great sadness of the lively, laughing, happy-go-lucky young woman whom he had known and for a time loved in Dublin, Luxembourg, and Kassel. And he shuddered at this latest and most terrible blow that life had inflicted on his poor Aunt Sissy. The family debts must seem very unimportant now, he thought, by comparison with this dreadful tragedy.
Yeah.
The atmosphere at home improved a little as his mother and father concentrated on building up their son's health. They encouraged him to eat well. His mother even approved of his drinking stout regularly to improve the state of his blood and put on weight.
That's a typical Irish Irish remedy.
It's called stout for a reason.
That's right. It'll make you stronger, yes.
Drinking your dinner. Let's see here. And Beckett's financial problems were underlined by letters typed in red from a Mr. Sean Cagney of the Income Tax Office threatening him with distrainment if he did not pay 5 guineas of tax due within a week. Since he could not pay and had no effects of his own to be distrained, he visited the office to beg for respite. So we're at a real lingering low point in this guy's life.
Yeah.
Like, he made some choices that could have been better.
Yeah.
It was with such pressures in mind that Beckett made several further attempts to write and to sell more of his work. He wrote 2 more short stories about Balakwa Shua, so that by May 13th, he had 5 stories finished. So he must have been trying to sell Dream earlier. And at Joe Hone's suggestion, he saw a young commissioning editor from Methuen, and since he had not received Dream back, offered him the poems and 2 of his stories. In return, Beckett said he expected only the lobster and the chablis consumed for lunch at the Shelbourne Hotel. And that, in the end, was what he got. Can't sell anything.
Right.
So let's see here.
He couldn't have, I mean, it's pretty unrealistic to think that novel was going to sell in a way.
I think so too. I'm going to read to the end of this chapter because this is all mission critical stuff. Throughout May and June, as his work on the stories dried up, Beckett became increasingly frustrated and depressed. To counter this frustration and to combat the feelings of claustrophobia and ennui that he experienced at home, he started to drink heavily again. One evening, he arrived home very drunk. He quarreled with his mother and began to throw plates from the kitchen table. Finally, he threw a pudding into the Veronica hedge near the kitchen door. Not surprisingly, his actions upset the entire household, and his mother was not one to forgive or forget easily what she considered outrageous behavior. So, for everyone's good, including his own, Beckett felt that he ought to prepare the way for him to leave home. He thought of asking his father for an allowance to permit him to live in Spain or Germany, and with the former possibility in mind, set to work to learn Spanish. So that's a great example of what this guy's like. Like, he's getting hammered. His first cousin, who was his lover, has died. He's getting shit-faced, making a scene at home. And then he's like, well, I'll just learn Spanish now. Like,
right.
That's how he
maybe,
copes. Like,
maybe you start sorting supplies at down at dad's office, maybe, right?
Right. But language, words were his way out. And this is going to carry all the way to the very end. So put a pin in that.
Yeah.
Throughout this period of what he called the old round of unhappenings, Beckett's father remained a great source of strength to him. Bill Beckett was in his 62nd year. His son noticed, of course, that he was aging, although Bill behaved as if he were 20 years younger, playing golf, swimming, and walking up mountains. And he admired the bluff, relativistic way with which his father was approaching old age and death. This is Beckett. Lovely walk this morning with father, who grows old with a very graceful philosophy, comparing bees and butterflies to elephants and parrots, and speaking of indentures with the leveler. Barging through hedges and over the walls with the help of my shoulder, blaspheming and stopping to rest under color of admiring the view. I'll never have anyone like him. Then, in mid-June, Bill Beckett collapsed with a heart attack. This first attack did not kill him, but it put him to bed for, the doctor proposed, several weeks at least of complete rest. It also made him feel very weak, miserable, and helpless. Beckett washed him and shaved him. An active man all his life, Beckett's father found such a regime intolerable. but it was not to last for long. On the morning of Monday, June 26th, Dr. Abramson came to Couldernot to visit his patient and pronounced him much better. To celebrate the good news and probably to cheer up his father, Beckett put on the brightest clothes he could find in his wardrobe. But hardly had the doctor left the house than Bill Beckett collapsed with another massive heart attack. He suffered badly for several hours, and then with all his family gathered around him, he died about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Sam was never to forget his father's final words to him. Fight, fight, fight. What a morning.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Okay. So I am looking at the clock. I am trying to get a handle on this. Are you getting a sense of Samuel Beckett and where he is right now,
for
Brad?
sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let me just drink a little bit of water here.
Yeah. Stay lubricated. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah,
a father dying is a big deal in any artist's life, I think. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mother too.
Yeah. I have some notes about this, but I think in the interest of time, I'm going to sort of blast through some of this stuff because, boy, we could do 4 episodes. All right. But that was a major point, and I'm very glad that we got there. So he goes to London from here following his father's death, and he begins 2 years of psychoanalysis.
Oh, okay.
At the Tavistock Clinic under a doctor named Dr. Wilfrid Bion. And aspects of this would become evident in his later work. And I'm just going to go ad hoc here and not read from the books, but he was reading all of the literature too. He took a very active interest. He only remembered being in therapy for 6 months, but he was actually in psychoanalysis for like 2 years. A big part of Beckett's story is that he had like serious depression. He was a miserable guy. Like,
I don't think that's super surprising based on the work, really.
Right.
But
it comes through in the work.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So let me see. I want to read a little bit about the reception of More Pricks Than Kicks. But just a little bit about his father's death. Devastated by the loss of his father, Beckett could find no words to express his grief. I can't write about him. I can only walk the fields and climb the ditches after him. Memories of their walks together haunted him, and he recalled with tears now Joyce's lines, "Father, forsaken, forgive thy son." He felt a crushing sense of guilt at having, as he saw it, let his father down. His father was buried in the Protestant cemetery, a little cemetery on the Greystone side of Brayhead between the mountains and the sea. And he would eventually write in a short story called Draff, written in 1933. Let me see here. This is a bit. In the cemetery, the light was failing, the sea moonstone washing the countless toes turned up, the mountains swarthy, ukalo behind the headstones, the loveliest little lap of earth you ever saw. Well, to make a long story short, the pair of them between them, she feeding him from above, upholstered the grave, the floor with moss and fern, the walls with the verdure outstanding. Low down, the clay was so hard that Harry had to take his shoe to the tholes. However, they made a great job of it, not a spot of clay showing when they had done. All was lush, green, and most sweet smelling. So he's thinking about death. And this is another thing he wrote, remembering this period. And I can see where I spilled some tea on the book here. After my father's death, I had trouble psychologically. The bad years were between when I had to crawl home in 32 and after my father's death in 33. I'll tell you how it was. I was walking down Dawson Street and I felt I couldn't go on. It was a strange experience I can't really describe. I found I couldn't go on moving. So I went into the nearest pub and got a drink just to stay still. And I felt I needed help. So I went to Jeffrey Thompson's surgery. Jeffrey wasn't there. He was at Lower Bagot Street Hospital, so I waited for him. When he got there, I was standing by the door. He gave me a look over and found nothing physically wrong. Then he recommended psychoanalysis for me. Psychoanalysis was not allowed in Dublin at that time. It was not legal. So in order to have psychoanalysis, you had to come to London. So
interesting.
He was, yeah. He was
how do you even make, anyway, go ahead.
How do you even,
I was like, how do you even make something like that illegal? It's not like, I don't know. It's weird, right? Like, how do you enforce such a thing?
You don't let the witch doctors practice their witch medicine, Brad.
I guess. Yeah.
Brad, we're going to be seizing the endowments, Brad.
Yeah.
you haven't followed me on Twitter. You don't know how we're going to do it. No. So here we go. So this is good. One exhilarating piece of news reached him in the mail on September 25th. Charles Prentice accepted his collection of short stories, which he eventually called More Pricks Than Kicks, for publication by Chatto and Windus. So not Shat-on and Wind Up, Chatto and Windus now. Yeah. Beckett was overjoyed, and while staying at the seaside, he wrote an additional story to satisfy Prentice, who suggested that another 5,000 or 10,000 words might help the book's sales. But the story, Echo's Bones, in which Belacqua is resurrected, proved totally unacceptable. In rejecting it, this is what they wrote. It is a nightmare, just too terribly persuasive. It gives me the jim jams, the same horrible and immediate switches of the focus and the same wild, unfathomable energy of the population. There are chunks I don't connect with. I am so sorry to feel like this. Perhaps it is only over the details, and I may have a correct inkling of the main impression. I am sorry, for I hate to be dense, but I hope I am not altogether insensitive. Echo's Bones certainly did land on me with a wallop. Echo's Bones would, I am sure, lose the book a great many readers. People will shudder and be puzzled and confused, and they won't be keen on analyzing the shudder. I'm certain that Echo's Bones would depress the sales very considerably. Right. So, but he does get the book accepted. He goes into the Tavistock Clinic. This is a little bit of what he said here. And he had what was called reductive analysis, which
that's the sort of treatment he had.
Yep. And it was to discover the dynamic links between the symptom and its causes in the past. The search was by free association and dream analysis for what Hadfield termed nuclear incidents. These need not necessarily be grossly traumatic, but were crises or turning points in the inner life of the child as recollected on the couch. The patient relived and realized a repression of one attitude, for example, dependence, by adopting a new attitude, for example, defiance, and a splitting off of his need for love, etc. Beckett's own account of what happened with his therapist suggests that a form of reductive analysis was indeed being used. This is what he said about it. And he had a really good relationship with his analyst. Like they hung out. And he took an active interest in this. He knew that he was like messed up somewhere in. I mean, if you know your father dies, and there's normally a grieving period, but typically you don't just like stand at the wall in a doctor's office and say, I need help. I can't do anything.
Right.
I can't do anything. That's like real serious, can't get up out of bed depression.
Right. Yeah. Broke something.
Yeah. So here's what he said. I used to lie down on the couch and try to go back in my past. I think it probably did help. I think it helped me perhaps to control the panic. I certainly came up with some extraordinary memories of being in the womb, intrauterine memories. I remember feeling trapped, of being imprisoned and unable to escape, of crying to be let out, but no one could hear. No one was listening. I remember being in pain, but being unable to do anything about it. I used to go back to my digs and write notes on what had happened, on what I'd come up with. I've never found them since. Maybe they still exist somewhere. I think it all helped me to understand a bit better what I was doing and what I was feeling. All right. So, very interesting stuff. A little more from him. For years, I was unhappy, consciously and deliberately, ever since I left school and went into Trinity, so that I isolated myself more and more, undertook less and less, and lent myself to a crescendo of disparagement of others and myself. But in all that, there was nothing that struck me as morbid. The misery and solitude and apathy and the sneers were elements of an index of superiority and guaranteed the feeling of arrogant otherness, which seemed as right and natural and as little morbid as the ways in which it was not so much expressed as implied and reserved and kept available for a possible utterance in the future. It was not until that way of living, or rather negation of living, developed such terrifying physical symptoms that it could no longer be pursued, that I became aware of anything morbid in myself. In short, if the heart had not put the fear of death into me, I would still be boozing and sneering and lounging around and feeling that I was too good for anything else. Yeah. So, I mean, it helped him. I have a little bit about the reception of More Pricks Than Kicks, 10 linked short stories. They tried to sell it to an American publisher. I don't think that they were able to do it. They went ahead and published it on their own. And let's see here. This very modern voice aroused a bewildering diversity of responses from Irish and English reviewers. Those favorable to the book received, perceptively situated Beckett in the tradition of Fielding and Sterne. One stressed that although clearly influenced by James Joyce, he is no fashionable imitator. Another one wrote, Mr. Beckett makes a great deal of everything. That is his art. Sometimes it degenerates into excellent blarney, but at its best, it has an ingenuity and freedom of movement, which is purely delightful. And the Times Literary Supplement critics spotted a definite fresh talent at work in it, though it is a talent not quite sure of itself. Many reviewers were hostile. Very, very strange and puzzling. One wrote, The meaning of More Pricks Than Kicks completely eludes me. Reviewers saw affinities with Eliot, Wyndham Lewis, and Ronald Furbank, and the debt to James Joyce was off and judged adversely. Mr. Beckett has imitated everything in James Joyce except the verbal magic and the inspiration.
Oh, my God.
The whole book is a frank pastiche of the lighter, more satirical passages of Ulysses, wrote another. So that's not good. No. That's not the kind of review you want.
No.
You want no bueno.
Yeah.
So let's see here. Let's see here. Suggestions that the stories were a farce for highbrows and unlikely to appeal to a large audience affected sales. As early as June, Charles Prentice wrote to Richard Aldington that Sam Beckett's short stories are, I fear, cutting no ice. And when Beckett acknowledged his first dismal financial statement early in November with an apology to the publishers, this is what they wrote to him. It was charming of you to write about the account. God knows I would the sales had been larger, but I do hope you won't be depressed, and you certainly mustn't worry about Chattis. I have shown your letter to the other partners, and they are completely at one with me. We are very glad indeed to have published More Pricks Than Kicks. And such regrets as we have are chiefly for you. After all, it is taking a chance to publish literature, and that we don't welcome disappointment. We are steeled against it. The author's position is much worse, and we do beg you again not to take your own disappointment to heart. It may appear to be a melancholy thing to say that history repeats itself in the case of the large majority of real books, but on the other hand, other writers have put these blows behind them and go on. So please, when the time comes and you are free, take up pen once more with enhanced vim. Don't for a moment think that we regret having published More Pricks Than Kicks.
Okay. That's a nice letter from a
That's
publisher.
a heartfelt letter. That's a heartfelt letter. And there's another, I don't know if I'll get to it in the course of this episode, but there's another point where like the internal memos, when they're rejecting him, they're like, we might be rejecting the next Joyce. Like we might be rejecting a genius, but there's no way we can sell this.
Right. But it'd be a lot. We'd be putting it out at a loss.
Like we would literally, literally be taking a loss to print this. Yeah. What a pickle. Nothing changes in the arts, does it, Brad?
Not really. No.
Yeah. Do you scale of one? Do you like Samuel right now?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I feel sympathy for him. In reality, he's still what are we in 1934 or 5?
Yeah, 1934.
Still pretty young. It's like, you can take a couple more blows to your writing career and still be all right. But I do. Yeah, I'm rooting for him, but I kind of feel bad for him. This is a tough time.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. All right, so he's living in London, getting therapy, He's got a book out. He's starting to become known. He's like in French circles. Now he's got this other book out, mixed reviews. He's publishing essays and reviews, including recent Irish poetry and humanistic quietism, which was a review of McGreevy's poems. So they're helping each other out. Take notes, people, by the way, current living artists, like this is how it's done, right? So they focused on the work of McGreevy, Brian Coffey, Dennis Devlin, and Blanade Salkald. Despite their slender achievements at the time, Beckett compared them favorably with their Celtic Revival contemporaries, invoking Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot and the French symbolists as their precursors. In describing these poets as forming the nucleus of a living poetic in Ireland, Beckett was tracing the outlines of an Irish poetic modernist canon. So he's not just a novelist and an author in his own right. He's like a critic too. This guy could have just like ensconced himself at Trinity and taught for 40 years, and he would have had a smaller Wikipedia than he does. So I've got a little bit more about. He hasn't permanently settled in Paris yet. Here he's kind of still bouncing around. So he will very shortly finally totally permanently settle in Paris. So I'm sorry if I gave that interpretation earlier. I mean, he was coming back and forth. His money was the problem. And, and of course, after his father dies, like he and his mother are kind of like, they're still at ends, but he would finally settle in right around the time. And I'll get to this in a bit, but like finally, when he settled in with the woman who would become his wife, he made a decision to go back home like once a month a year. And to keep that relationship with his mother alive. Like he matured a lot. Like he's definitely kind of a spoiled little rich brat, a little bit, like little bit, like which is not what I expected from him.
No,
but
neither.
Where he ultimately lands is pretty awesome. So let's see here. As the years progressed, Beckett's letters revealed a feeling of increasing restlessness at living in Culdrona, the family home. There appears to have been no major upheaval with his mother for several months, simply the growing certainty that he must get away again. Then, during the summer, something happened that made flight essential. I think one of the reasons I get confused is there were like multiple times he had to flee Dublin for scandal. Based.
Comes crawling back.
A year before, his childhood friend Mary Manning had married Mark DeWolf Howe. She was living in Boston and came over for the summer. Being joined in Dublin by two young Bostonian friends, Elizabeth Betty Stockton and Isabel Bell Gardner, who had been staying with the Stockton family in a rented house on the southwest coast of County Cork, where Shakespeare came from. On their own admission, the young women came to Dublin to meet some men and kick up their heels in a lively, if innocent way. They stayed at the Shelbourne Hotel. Bell had a charming romantic date who wore a shiny blue serge suit. His name was Erskine Childers, and he later became the president of Ireland. Betty's date was a tall, good-looking, blue-eyed, charming but reticent Dubliner called Sam Beckett. He was invited to tea at the end of June to meet Mary's young American friends and was immediately attracted by this lively, laughing 20-year-old who seemed so excitingly different from anyone he had ever met before. She left him reeling. Sometimes they went out for drives together. On one occasion, they were invited to tea with Mr. O'Leary. It was an awkwardly formal occasion with some of the male guests standing stiffly to attention around the room, their hands folded in front of them. The formality of this occasion began to amuse the American girls when their host walked over, carrying an enormous plate heaped high with cake and said, "And will you have a cookie?" That was the catalyst. All four of us broke into uncontrollable laughter. The group of men stirred, stared, and seemed to fold their hands a little tighter. We were appalled by our lack of manners, but this sobering notion could not stem the tide of our laughter. It became apparent that our only recourse was to leave, and leave we did in the rain with no surcease in sight. We drove to a grey and stony beach along the Irish Sea. Sam threw rocks at England, an activity that eventually calmed us. Betty Stockton enjoyed Beckett's company and they became good friends, but she was simply not interested romantically in this quiet, deep, moody Irishman who was so obviously bowled over by her looks, her liveliness, and her charm. One of his most personal and directly accessible poems, Cascando, was written under her spell in July. Here are a few lines. A last even of last times of saying, if you do not love me, I shall not be loved. If I do not love you, I shall not love. The churn of stale words in the heart again. Love, love, love. Thud of the old plunger, pestling the unalterable way of words. And that's way like curds and whey.
Right. Interesting.
But Betty did not respond to the affair, which had really never been one. And she ended its short one-sided existence. Afterward, he wrote her several letters, which she admitted she did not understand and to which she did not reply. Beckett was disappointed and intensely upset. So, on the rebound, he sought consolation later in the summer in the arms of Betty's friend, Mary Manning DeWolf Howe, a more experienced married woman whom he had known since they were children and whose witty company he enjoyed. She summarized the likely causes of their wild affair. Both of us were frightened and lonely. I was terribly frightened. I got married in a hurry over here in the U.S., and I didn't know whether I was right or not. It was two frightened, lonely people about the same age, the same society, the same background, suddenly in crisis, and that was it. Mm-hmm. They went out with each other regularly for the rest of the summer. It was obvious that a sexual affair was going on, and both their mothers were frantic with worry. May Beckett called Susan Manning saying, "Please God, when is she going home?" Susan responded, "Oh God, I hope she goes soon. God forgive me." In the first, and I don't know, man, there's something about a Mrs. DeWolf Howe,
right?
That's married. That sounds
sounds pretty married. Yeah.
That sounds pretty married to me. In any case, in the first week of September, Molly, as she was known, took the boat back to Boston, and everyone breathed a huge sigh of relief. Beckett had already planned his own departure. By September 19th, he could write that the prospect of getting away is a great relief, although he had no specific plans except to travel to Germany and then Salon Levant, as the wind takes me. All right, so yeah, okay, red-blooded.
Yeah.
I'm gonna blast through the Germany years and bring him up to this fallout that he has with his mother. He gets settled in Paris finally after that. I said at the beginning of the episode that like I might get a little confused because he's all over the place, right? Coming and going. He's peripatetic, rootless cosmopolitan. Yeah. And I'm going to talk about this libel case that's so fascinating, and then that's going to get us into the war, and then we'll talk about the work a little bit, and that'll be the episode. Good, Brad? You with me?
Yeah, let's do it, man.
Okay, all right. So he goes and he wanders through Germany, and I have a little story I'm gonna skip past, but it's kind of a funny one where he meets a con man. I think it's in Munich, who sells him a suit. And like he kind of knows he's getting conned, but he kind of enjoys it. And he can tell the guy needs some money, so he gives him the money. And then finally he gets his suit, and it's just like the most like ugly blue suit. Like it doesn't fit at all. And I don't know. Anyway, and he would wear it. He got it retailored in Paris, and he'd wear this blue suit. It's all very sort of theatrical and kind of in any case. Yeah, I just have this bit about con man in the suit, but let's see what he says here. This is a little bit about his trip to Germany. The trip is being a failure. Germany is horrible. Money is scarce. I am tired all the time. All the modern pictures are in the cellars. I keep a pillar to post account. That is, the diaries used here. But I've written nothing connected since I left home, nor disconnected, and not the ghost of a book beginning. When he wasn't writing, he was frickin' miserable. And that was like for his entire life. It was just, okay. In any case, the physical mess is trivial beside the intellectual mess. I do not care and don't know whether they are connected or not. It is enough that I can't imagine anything worse than the mental marasmus in which I totter and sweat for months. It has turned out indeed to be a journey from and not to, as I knew it was before I began it. He's still having health problems. Yeah. All right. So in 1935, he successfully published a book of his poetry. And initially it was just going to be called, I think, Poems. but he thought that was a little pretentious, so he decided to call it Echoes, Bones, and Other Precipitates.
That's less pretentious.
That's less pretentious. Yeah.
It's actually not a bad title, but
no, I like the idea of something being called a precipitate.
Yeah.
He worked on his novel Murphy, which is the first of the three in the or no, it's not, because it's Malloy, Malone Dies, and the Unnameable are the three in the trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
But he was working on a novel called Murphy. In May of 1935, he wrote McGreevy that he'd been reading about film and wanted to go to Moscow to study with Sergei Eisenstein. He wrote Eisenstein in 1936, and he offered to apprentice himself to them. Nothing came of it, as his letter was lost owing to Eisenstein's quarantine during the smallpox outbreak. Different history, right?
Yeah,
like, what if he had gone to Russia to study film? We might have like a movie from Samuel Beckett.
Right.
Who knows? Yeah. So let's see here. So he's working on Murphy, and he's filling up notebooks. He's going around museums in Germany, and he's starting to see the what's coming in Germany. And he's starting to see the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party. And he's going to return briefly to Ireland and oversee the publication of Murphy in 1937. Are you familiar with this novel? It's published in like 1938.
Not really. I mean, other than knowing it exists, I couldn't tell you anything about it.
Yeah. I don't know much about it myself. I know more about the plays, but this one was written in English, and this was published by Routledge on the recommendation of Beckett's painter friend, J.B. Yeats, Jack Butler Yeats. And just real quickly, the plot of Murphy follows an eponymous seedy solipsist who lives in a soon-to-be-condemned apartment in West Brompton. The novel opens with the protagonist having tied himself naked to a rocking chair in his apartment, rocking back and forth in the dark.
Okay.
This seems to be a habit for Murphy, who, in carrying out the ritual, attempts to enter a near, if not totally non-existent state of being, possibly something akin to sensory deprivation, which he finds pleasurable. All right.
Interesting. Okay. That's an interesting setup, I think. Yeah.
Yep. So let's see here. So in the analysis, it says, among the many thinkers to influence Murphy's mind-body debate are Spinoza, Descartes, and the little-known Belgian occasionalist Arnold Goelink. Okay. So heavy, big thinker. We've got a big thinker. All right. Yeah. So now we're coming to, and then he would translate his own work, right? So he writes Murphy in English, translates it to French. And this is when
publishers love that. It's probably a little cheaper.
Oh, right. Yeah, no, true. And plus you can like actually oversee, the total quality of the work.
Yeah.
There's speaking about Beckett and his, like how serious he was about artistic integrity. There's a letter that he wrote to one of his publishers who's going to publish a piece in English. Can't remember which specific one, but he said, look, if you're wanting to publish this, you have to understand that when I make this translation, some of this translation is going to be more savage in English than you think. Like you don't know French, right? So you've got to be ready for what I'm going to do. And I will accept no censorship. And that was like through his entire life. And I really admire him for that. Yeah. Because as soon as you compromise once, it's over.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So we're gonna talk about this big. I thought I had forgotten that we had like multiple fallouts with Mom. Yeah, this is gonna be the big one. So let's see here. I want to make sure I get the right page. Yeah, here it is. There's more, but I'm going to rush forward here. So we're at the beginning of 1937. his brother Frank got married. And he was sort of very poorly behaved around his brother's wedding. Like it was clearly just a little bit. I actually want to read a little bit about this. Around Frank's wedding, Beckett went on the blind, as he put it, going to a bottle party.
That means like blackout drunk?
Yeah, blackout drunk.
Yeah.
At about 2 a.m, some of the men went for a swim in the pool at this party. It was like before his brother's wedding. We've never done anything like this, have we? In the course of which Beckett fell and cut his head. When the party eventually ended, he left behind his watch, half a bottle of whiskey left behind, and a lovely velour lightweight, and a lovely velour hat that he had bought in Germany. Although he was able to retrieve the hat and the watch the next day, the gash on his head could not be hidden, and his mother was horrified that he had to turn up at the wedding bearing such visible signs of his wild excess. Worse still, she knew that he had been driving the car while drunk and feared, as in his more sober moments he did himself, for his physical safety. All this was anathema to the ultra respectable May. That's a little harsh on mom. Like, I don't know, respectable or not. Like, yeah, you shouldn't be getting like shit-faced hammered, plunging into the pool, scarring your head, and driving drunk. Like, I don't think that's like, mom's a stuffy Protestant.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, like, isn't this like his third Dewey accident? Like,
I don't know if he had an accident. Yeah, but yeah. It's like, he's like, this is not good. And he would continue to drink and I think, well, in any case, Beckett reacted to Frank's wedding with very mixed feelings. He was pleased to see his brother happier than he had been for a long time, although appalled by the way in which the love affair was socialized. This is what he wrote about his brother's wedding. Watching the presents come along has been painful. The awful unconscious social cynicism that knows that what the relationship comes down to in the end is gongs and tea trolleys, that without them there is no together, till it seems almost a law of marriage that the human personal element should be smothered out of existence from the word go, reduced to a mere occasion for good housekeeping and house chat, the egg cup in the pie of domestic solidity. Pretty cynical. A little bit of a brat, but pretty cynical. All right, so here we go. At the beginning of September 1937, with Frank and Jean away on their honeymoon in Scotland and Beckett recovering from gastric flu, May was remarkably patient with him, posing few questions and making no scenes. One day, a gypsy came to the door and read her palm. The woman assured May that she would live to be over 90 and never be a burden on anyone, and that she should not worry anymore about her second son because he had crossed the cross. But this lull in their angry disputes was not to last for very long. We don't know what precipitated their final and most bitter quarrel, what caused Beckett to leave Ireland, never to live there again. Not clear if it was a single event or slow buildup of annoyances, but we know it happened between September 21st and 28th. And let's see here. There was a massive quarrel. But by September 28th, he wrote to McGreevy from the Imperial Hotel in Waterford, where his brother had gone on a job. It is a great relief to me to get away from home, where the position between mother and me has become impossible. So impossible that I intend not to sleep at home again until I leave the country, which will be, I hope, early next week. I was wrong in thinking I was well enough to deal with her and with myself in relation to her. Now I give up une fois pour toutes, once and for all. Now this gets into the court case, which we've got to cover because it's too good. And there's a thought that this court case, so it might have been a car accident. There's another car accident, right? So on his first day out driving following his 10-day bout of gastric flu, he was involved in a serious collision with a truck.
Oh, boy.
Listen to this. This biographer is way too kind to Beckett because this is some like serious stuff, dude. He was not injured, but the car had to be written off. Beckett did not think that he had been driving dangerously, but the police thought otherwise and brought a prosecution against him. Since he had only third-party insurance, no money could be claimed from the insurance company. And because of the prosecution, a claim for compensation against the driver or owners of the truck would stand no chance at all of succeeding. So the car was a total loss.
Okay.
May would have been upset and angry, especially if she believed he had been drinking. But she was probably even more annoyed by Beckett's determination to make a court appearance to defend himself instead of pleading guilty and paying the fine. In her eyes, this would mean a public ignominy that could easily have been avoided. The court case may have proved to be the last straw, or the last but one. This is key part of the story. For Beckett had also agreed to appear as a witness in a libel case that Harry Sinclair was bringing against Oliver St. John Gogarty.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know who Oliver St. John Gogarty was?
Yeah, Gogarty was another figure, Irish, sort of a writer, I think, who was a kind of a rival of Joyce's, I believe, and does appear as what's his name in Ulysses?
Stately plump Buck Mulligan.
Yeah, Buck Mulligan. Yeah, I couldn't think of the name.
That's it.
Yeah.
Yep. So let's hear about this court case, because this is pure Art of Darkness juice. Right. I got the sauce for you, Brad. I'm bringing you the juice straight from Dublin, straight out of Dublin. All right. May was resolutely opposed. Okay. She did not want him to testify because, like, he would be pilloried in public, right? And this would be tabloid fodder, okay? In addition to his recent wild behavior. He wrote her this letter. I am what, let's see. Oh, no, he didn't write this to her. He wrote this to someone else, but this is good. I am what her savage love has made me, and it is good that one of us should accept that finally. As it has been all this time, she wanted me to behave in a way agreeable to her in her October of anaphylactic gentility, or to her friends ditto, or to the business code of father, idealized and dehumanized. Whenever in doubt what to do, ask yourself, what would darling Bill have done? The grotesque can go no further. It is like after a long forenoon of the thumb screws being commanded by the burro, the torturer, to play his favorite song without words with feeling. All right. So it was a terrible scene. He finally decided to leave. And it was pretty inconvenient because he knew he would have to return for this Sinclair Gogarty trial. Right. So, and then after the quarrel, she left the house temporarily, right, to kind of give him room to come back. I mean, they're playing this kind of game, you know?
Right.
This is what someone had to say about Beckett in Ireland. Living in Ireland was confinement for Sam. He came up against the Irish censorship. He could not swim in the Irish literary scene or in Free State politics the way that Yeats did. But the big city, the larger horizon, offered the freedom of comparative anonymity and stimulation instead of Dublin, oppression, jealousy, intrigue, and gossip. The larger horizon was Paris. Okay. And that's where he could just, he would rather be poor in Paris than comfortably middle class, you know, in Dublin.
Yeah.
He left for Paris in the middle of October, staying in London only a few days en route. He said arriving in Paris was like coming out of jail in April. And that is where he lived for the next 52 years of his life. He became a Parisian.
Man.
All right, so let's get this case set up. I think it's just fascinating, this libel case.
Yeah.
All right. So he gets in Paris, all right, and then he's got financial worries, but this Harry Sinclair libel action was brought before the High Court in Dublin in November. So to give evidence, he had to return to Ireland. Okay. He couldn't afford to do so, but he paid his own return fare on the promise of a refund out of the damages if the case were won. It's not sure if he ever got that money back. Okay. Yeah. But here's what happened. We remember the Sinclairs from Peggy and everything, right?
Yeah.
A few weeks before his death in May, Boss Sinclair had read some passages in Dr. Oliver St. John Gogarty's book, As I Was Going Down Sackville Street, which he believed clearly libeled their grandfather, Morris Harris, as well as himself and Harry. The grandfather had established a jewelry and antique shop at 47 Nassau Street, and on his death in 1909 had handed the shop to his twin grandsons. Harry agreed with Boss that he should sue Gogarty and the other defendants, Rich and Cowan, the London publishers responsible for publishing the book at the end of 1936. You don't want to get involved in libel cases in the UK.
No. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm sure.
Different. Very different. If I write something, it's clearly identifiable as you can get jammed up, right? Very different from here. And I assume even more severe back then, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So let's see here. Beckett also promised Boss on his deathbed that he would appear as a witness in support of the libel accusations. The passages complained of on pages 70 and 71 of Gogarty's book concerned an old usurer who had eyes like a pair of periwinkles on which somebody had been experimenting with a pin, and a nose like a shrunken tomato, one side of which swung independently of the other. The older he grew, the more he pursued the immature and enticed little girls into his office.
Ooh.
That was bad enough, but he had grandsons, and these directed the steps of their youth to follow in grandfather's footsteps with more zeal than discrimination. There followed a reference to twin grandchildren. Earlier on page 65 were some verses that formed a further part of Harry Sinclair's complaint. The first stanza went, "Two Jews grew in Sackville Street and not in Piccadilly. One was gaitered on the feet, the other one was Willie." A stanza later, in the American edition only, the poem went on. "They kept a shop for objects wrought by masters famed of old, where you, no matter what you bought, were genuinely sold. But Willie spent the sesterces and brought on strange disasters, because he sought new mistresses more keenly than old masters." These were followed by other lines of verse that end with the words, "Thus did the twin grandchildren of the ancient chicken butcher." The Sinclair grandchildren were indeed twins, although not identical twins. Harry Rounder was tie-pin and pinstripe, whereas Boss Craggier was more tweed and open shirt when he was all still on the go. Okay. All right. So the question here really is, like, do you recognize these guys as the people that are being libeled?
Yeah.
Right. And Beckett put it in account. He said, "On reading the paragraphs, I instantly inferred that the lines were about so-and-so." Okay. And then the judge said, "The evidence of Mr. Beckett is more important as being that of an outsider." So Beckett's super important here, and he has to show up. Okay. So here's what happens when Beckett takes a stand. It's at the point in the book where there's all these great pictures and stuff, a lot of theatrical pictures. This is what happened. The case created a sensation in Dublin. There is an illusion common among Dubliners that they are potential writers or barristers. The opportunity of seeing both professions simultaneously on display was not to be missed. There were queues for seats in the gallery of the court. The action was tried in court number 4 of the High Court, which is one of 4 courtrooms forming a circle under the copper dome in the front of the 4 courts. This building, designed by Richard Gandon in 1781, is only a road's width from the Liffey's edge, where a graceful curving balustrade sets it off against the brown tide with its drifting swans. So it's a little bit of theater here, right?
Yeah.
Beckett took the stand as a witness after the plaintiff, his uncle Harry, had set out the reasons why his grandfather could be identified with Gogarty's old usurer. This meant, of course, admitting not only that Morris Harris had a bulbous nose, but that he had been accused of enticing young girls into his shop. So it's a real thing that happened.
Right.
The grandfather. Okay.
So if you're telling the truth, it's not libel, right?
But this stuff he says that the grandsons are following in his footsteps and doing the same.
Right.
And
right. That's a big accusation.
That's serious business if that hasn't been proven. Okay.
God, would you want to bring this suit, or do you want to just hope it just quietly nobody pays attention to the book? You know what I mean?
They're dirt poor and they need money.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They need they need money. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So Beckett, let's hear how Beckett was treated. First, it was indicated to him during the cross-examination that no reference had been made in his affidavit to the fact that he was in any way related to the plaintiff and consequently could not be considered at all objective. Then he was asked whether he had written a book on Marcel Proust. Beckett duly corrected counsel, as Fitzgerald knew he would, on the pronunciation of the name. The barrister went on to ask whether Proust had indulged in the psychology of sex and how long it had taken for Beckett's book to be banned by the censorship of Ireland. To the first question, Beckett answered that he had not been aware of Proust's indulgence, but in answer to the second question, he had to admit that it took about 6 months for his own book to be banned. Fitzgerald suggested that it was banned because it was blasphemous and obscene. I never discovered why it was banned, replied Beckett. The counsel for the defense then switched his line of attack, as had been anticipated, to the 1934 stories More Pricks Than Kicks. The title alone would probably have been enough to put off any sensitively pious jurors. Fitzgerald read aloud for the jury the following passage, spoken by the polar bear character to a Jesuit priest in an argument about religion conducted on a bus. All right. The Lebensbahn of the Galilean is the tragic comedy of solipsism that will not capitulate. The humanities and retromies and quaffs of irreverence are on par with the hey prestos, arrogance, and egoism. He is the first great self-contained playboy. The cryptic abasement before the woman taken red-handed is as great a piece of megalomaniacal impertinence as his interference in the affairs of his boyfriend Lazarus. That's a weapons-grade blasphemy.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. All right, little more here. Then Fitzgerald asked Beckett whether the passage represented a blasphemous character of Jesus Christ. Beckett replied that both the characters who spoke these words and the priest who heard them were fictitious, and that as a writer, he could put words into their mouths that he did not agree with. The defense asked Beckett whether he would describe himself as a Christian, a Jew, or an atheist, to which Beckett replied, none of the three. Fitzgerald also asked him if he was the author of a book called Horoscope, but printed with a W. That is, horoscope. Beckett admitted that he was, and that it had been privately printed for circulation among friends. The suggestion being that this was yet another book with immoral contents. All right. So the exchanges were widely reported in the press. And a column subheading of the Irish Times the next day read, Bawds and blasphemers.
Oh, boy.
Harry Sinclair won the case, and he was awarded damages of £900 plus cost, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, nice. Okay.
Yeah. The trial cost Oliver St. John Gogarty around £2,000 in all, and undoubtedly hastened his departure from Dublin. But Beckett, who was on the winning side, came out nothing but a loser. Even the judge, in his summing up to the jury, expressed the view that he did not strike me as a witness on whose word I would place a great deal of reliance. Okay. So, and he just wanted to get away. And so now he's just done with Dublin. Okay.
Yeah. He's now, been his whole career and personality's been put on trial for nothing, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. He did it for Peggy's families. I mean,
sure. But
that's a high price to pay.
Yeah. You're not supposed to be getting called into, it's not like he committed a crime and he was on trial. So he's got to it's all got to come out for, that's not fun at all.
You promise your uncle that you'll do this thing on his deathbed. And it's just it's like a comic farce. It's like yeah. What do you think happens to him when he gets back to Paris, Brett?
Well, let's see. He doesn't have any money. I think he falls into depression. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, no, he gets stabbed by a pimp.
Okay, I didn't see that coming. All right.
Okay. So this is the beginning of the next chapter. I love this. The courtroom drama was over. Real life drama was still to come. It happened just a month later on 12th night at about 1:00 in the morning. Nothing good happens after midnight, according to Beckett. So this is what he said after 50 years. I was bringing them, his friends, back home to the Cour d'Ave, small dead-end street off the Avenue d'Orléans, now the Avenue General Leclerc. We just had supper in that big restaurant that still exists under the same name on the corner. Love that about Paris. You can still sort of, we had just spent the evening together, Duncan, his wife, and myself, the three of us, and this pimp emerged and started to pester us to go with him. We didn't know who he was until later, whether he was a pimp or not. This was established later when I identified him in hospital. They brought photographs to the Hospital Brosé. Anyway, he stabbed me. Fortunately, he just missed the heart.
Oh my gosh.
And I was lying bleeding on the pavement. Then I don't remember much of what happened. After stabbing Beckett, the man ran away quickly. Beckett fell to the ground after a few seconds. He felt his left side and discovered blood on his hand. He called out that he was bleeding. Alan and Belinda managed to get him to their flat where they undressed him and were horrified when they saw the wound. As they did not know the name of a doctor, they phoned the police, and Beckett, unconscious by now, was rushed off by ambulance to the nearest hospital.
Huh.
Yeah. So
crazy.
There you go. He gets stabbed. I mean, and by a millimeter.
Yeah.
A millimeter.
Jeez.
He could have died just by some pimp in Paris. I mean, yeah.
That's wild. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So yeah. Beckett, in his own words, preferred France at war to Ireland at peace. And, you know, he's hanging around Paris at the time. Okay, fine. We've got that. Oh, he also had an affair with Peggy Guggenheim. Okay.
Who did?
All right. Yeah. Right. Another Peggy.
I'm in a libel suit all of a sudden. God damn.
Oh, geez. Oh, no. So he gets stabbed by this pimp, and I'll talk a little bit more about the affair with Peggy Guggenheim in a bit. But Joyce helped arrange a private room for Beckett at the hospital. This is where he meets Suzanne, who would become his wife. He's already met her, I think, but like the publicity surrounding the stabbing attracted the attention of Suzanne Deschavaux Dumesnil, who knew Beckett slightly from his first stay in Paris, and they would begin a lifelong companionship there. So, of course, we get another court case, right? At a preliminary hearing, I love this. Beckett asked his attacker for the motive behind the stabbing. The pimp was named Prudent. Prudent replied, "Je ne sais pas, monsieur. Je m'excuse." Basically said, "I don't know why, sir. I beg your pardon."
Oh my God. Oh, he's probably just wasted.
Yeah, wasted, or just didn't like the look of his face, didn't like his accent.
Yeah.
He overhears this guy talking. He's got a funny accent, and he rejects, I don't know, I don't want your...
Yeah. Pimps aren't always known for, not everything they do.
Right. Yeah. This is funny. Beckett eventually dropped the charges against his attacker, partially to avoid further formalities, partly because he found Prudent likable and well-mannered.
Yeah.
I still think Prudent got put away for a little bit, but
well, I can see from Beckett's perspective too. You don't want to have to be like doing a lot of explaining about what you were up to at 1 o'clock in the morning, right?
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So he starts to write in French at this point, and he starts to write French poetry now. And this is where he makes a very serious set of decisions, which I alluded to earlier. First, he made a decision about his mother. Okay. He decided he still cared very deeply for her. He felt very sorry, right? She had burned her hands badly while reading with a candle in her bed. Her husband's dead, and he would write, "I feel sorry to her often to the point of tears." That is the part that I have not analyzed the way I suppose. So he decided to go back to Foxrock for a month every year. Okay. So, and aside from the war years, he did that. Very important for him. And I admire him for that, because you only have one mother. Yeah. And you never know when that is taken away from you. Yeah. And then his second decision was to really, I'm not going to say he ever like settled down, but like relatively settled down with Suzanne. He did not talk about her in his letters to friends until 1939. And he wrote to McGreevy, "There is a French girl also whom I am fond of dispassionately, and who is very good to me. The hand will not be overbid. As we both know that it will come to an end, there is no knowing how long it may last. Dispassionately and very good to me suggest more a growing companionship than a passionate sexual affair."
Yeah.
Peggy Guggenheim oversimplified when she wrote that the difference between them was that Suzanne made curtains while she made scenes. but the thoughtful, calm, caring side of Suzanne counted for a lot in a relationship that became increasingly close. 6 years older than Beckett, she was attractive in a slightly masculine way. She dressed smartly, if soberly. She was a strong, mature, independent woman of decisive left-wing opinions. Although her mother lived in Troyes, Suzanne had spent part of her girlhood in Tunisia. She was an accomplished pianist with an interest in literature and theater and had a voracious appetite for music and concert going. She had studied at the École Normale de Musique in the 1920s. She's like a musician. She had perfect pitch. You could play any note of music and she would immediately tell you what it was. And she said she could identify every note when several were played together. She was popular, had many good friends, and people say she's been seen as taking over Beckett's mother's role.
Sure. Yeah.
And she would grumble about his excessive drinking. She didn't drink herself. Yeah. And she also understood and shared his need for silence. The way people go on saying things. Who shall silence them at last? The narrator had asked in Dream of Fair to Middling Women. One phrase in Beckett's letter to McGreevy, there is no knowing how long it may last, was understandably cautious, yet in the end, remarkably prescient, since their relationship was to last until their deaths. And he survived her only by a few months. And we're going to come to that. And this is where they get into the war. So we're coming steadily in. I've got a lot here about his early work. And I'm going to just sort of like, I'm going to read this. It's interesting. All right. Yeah. So his earliest works are considered to have been strongly influenced by Joyce. They're erudite and seem to display his learning merely for its own sake, which I think we've seen, resulting in several obscure passages. The opening phrases of the short story collection, More Pricks Than Kicks, is this. It was morning, and Belacqua was stuck in the first of the canty in the moon. He was so bogged that he could move neither backward nor forward. Blissful Beatrice was there, Dante also, and she explained the spots on the moon to him. She shewed him in the first place where he was at fault. Then she put up her own explanation. She had it from God, therefore he could rely on its being accurate in every particular. Okay. The passage makes reference to the comedy, which can confuse readers not familiar with the comedy. And it also anticipates aspects of Beckett's later work, physical inactivity of the character Belacqua, a character immersed in his own head and his own thoughts, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which, somehow he makes it work in the theater. It's very, very interesting. Yeah. Similar elements are present in Murphy, which also explores the themes of insanity and chess. Chess is a big motif in his work. I mean, you have Endgame, one of the major plays, The End of the Party, Fin de Partie, which I guess is what they call the Endgame. And in any case, he translated it as Endgame, which is a chess reference. Yeah. And this is the opening sentence, apparently. The sun shone, having no alternative on nothing new. Wow. That's the opening sentence. It's so wonderful. It's just that bleak. Yeah. And that was even before the war. I mean, this is just like this sort of blasé, I don't even know what you call it, pessimism, or sort of, it's like a comic pessimism. Yeah. He also, and here you go. So his 1930 essay, Proust, was strongly influenced by Schopenhauer's pessimism and laudatory descriptions of saintly asceticism. We're going to cover Schopenhauer next year. At this time, Beckett began to write creatively in the French language. In the late 1930s, he wrote a number of short poems in that language, and their sparseness seems to show that Beckett was in the process of simplifying his style, which would also be evidenced in the novel Watt. All right, so we're going to get him into World War II now. He would call his time in the French Resistance Boy Scout stuff, which is, it was a lot more than that. Okay. All right. This is what he wrote when war broke out. Or or when it was about to break out. If there is a war, as I fear there must be soon, I shall place myself at the disposition of this country. He had seen things, and he had decided, I'm going to like help the French if this war breaks out, which I think is rather heroic. He could have very easily scooted to Ireland for sure.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I just want to let's see. They went down south, and then they left Paris, and then they ended up coming back to Paris. So I've got this excerpt here from In Love with Hiding, Samuel Beckett's War by Marjorie Perloff. And this was, I guess, in the Iowa Review. So in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on this.
Okay.
Don't forget, after dark, I'm going to go into the book and I'm going to read this very fascinating passage about the Catholic priest who betrayed Beckett's cell in Paris. And I think that's going to be a juicy one. We got Andre the Giant, which would come later. We got the bit about Jung, and then we got that. Patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Okay, so this is all right. This is from In Love with Hiding. Beckett might have sat out World War II in his native Ireland, but as he later quipped in an interview with Israel Schenker, I preferred France in war to Ireland at peace. By 1941, he had joined the resistance in Paris, largely as a response to the arrests of such Jewish literary friends as his old Trinity College classmate, Alfred Perron. Perron was like, I think, associated with Joyce, and he was like harassed and had like serious problems, and that Beckett took that personally.
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm. And of course he had his uncle, was Jewish as well. And in Germany, I think they had to leave at a certain point, so he saw it. He saw that sort of, bigotry firsthand. And around this time, Joyce died too in Switzerland, 1941. I imagine emotionally that might have been a heavier thing if the war hadn't been going on, but it's just sort of like brushed past here.
Yeah.
As a neutral Irishman who spoke fluent French, Beckett was in great demand. He and his companion, later wife, Suzanne, joined Gloria. They were an information network whose main and dangerous job was to translate documents about Axis troop movements and relay them to Allied headquarters in London. The coding of messages and transfer of microfilm hidden in matchboxes, toothpaste tubes, and so on has interesting implications for Beckettian dialogue. So like there's like a cutout system whereby each cell member reported to the next in line, often unknown to him or herself. Right. So it's like this comes out in his writing a little bit somehow. So Gloria was ultimately betrayed by a double agent in August 1942. And this is some real stuff. Like if you were caught with a matchbook, they would hide these little things in like cigarettes.
Sure.
They were like hiding coded messages. I mean, if you got stopped and that was discovered,
you're in trouble.
You were in serious trouble. Like we're talking about life and death.
Yeah. Spying in the midst of a war. Yeah. It's a big deal.
Yep. It's a big deal in peacetime too. Yeah. So they were betrayed by a double agent, the priest that we're going to talk about on the After Dark.
I don't really like that guy.
I'm thinking that he didn't take the one true faith that seriously.
Yeah.
The dude lived a double life. Like he would attend mass and like say mass in the morning and then go into Paris and hang out with like one of his mistresses.
Oh my
God.
That
okay. Yeah. It's, as we say, it's a big church.
Right,
you got to make room. You got to make room for all kinds in the church.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. This guy was a bad egg for sure.
Yeah.
So they had to flee Paris. They headed to the unoccupied zone in the south of France, and it took them 6 weeks to cross into the free zone. They made their way by hiding in barns and sheds, sometimes behind trees, inside haystacks, and down in ditches.
Wow.
He told James Nelson, I can remember waiting, keyword waiting, in a barn. There were 10 of us until it got dark, then being led by a passeur over streams. We could see a German sentinel in the moonlight. Then I remember passing a French post on the other side of the line. The Germans were on the road, so we went across fields. Some of the girls were taken over in the boot of a car.
Huh.
So this is like not Boy Scout stuff. This is serious. Yeah. In another 6 weeks or so, the Becketts reached Roussillon, a village so named for its location on a plateau of red rock, some 40 kilometers from Avignon, where they were to become, which was to become their home for the next 3 years. It was a 700-kilometer journey on foot. Wow. And Beckett's biographers say that the stay was even worse. It was a mixture of boredom and danger, which is the vibe that Godot kind of has.
Yeah.
Right? Like, as an alien identifiable by his Irish accent, Beckett had to avoid Nazi patrols coming through the area by hiding, sometimes for days at a time, in the fields and woods on the outskirts of Roussillon. Then, too, they never knew when they heard someone approach, whether it would be a German patrol or friendly villagers. The uniqueness of the French war experience compared to the English or the German was that there was no way of differentiating between friend and enemy. Collaborator and resistance fighter, after all, looked alike. Waiting, the original title of Waiting for Godot, became the central activity. At first, the Becketts lived at the village hotel where bedbugs and mice were everywhere, and where they had to go outdoors, not only for the privy, but also for drinking water. The fields where they searched for potatoes were often seas of mud. For a time, Beckett worked for a farmer named Aud and picked grapes for another farmer named Bonnelly, who is mentioned by name in Attendant Godot and Waiting for Godot. The names were dropped in the English version. So there are these names that are like specifically related to this time during the war, dropped in English, but like
really, that is interesting, because you think of Waiting for Godot as this like disembodied abstraction kind of. So
which it kind of is. It is, but it's also drawn from very specific experiences, which is the kind of the case she's making in this piece. So in any case, let's see here. That last sentence explodes the script's air of reasonable reportage. What is the meaning of the word provisional when the universe itself has become provisional? So let's see here. What do we have? We have two men waiting for another whom they know only by an implausible name, which may not be his real name, in a ravaged and blasted landscape, a world that was ampler and more open once, but is permeated with pointlessness now. Mysterious dispensers of beatings, a man of property and his servant in flight. We're talking about Godot here, and the anxiety of the two who wait, their anxiety to be as inconspicuous as possible in a strange environment. We're not from these parts, sir, where their mere presence is likely to cause a remark. It is curious, this is from this piece I'm still reading, how readers and audiences do not think to observe the most obvious thing about the world of the play, that it resembles France occupied by the Germans, in which its authors spent the war years. How much waiting must have gone on in that bleak world? How many times must resistance operatives, displaced persons when everyone was displaced, anonymous, ordinary people for whom every day renewed the dispersal of meaning, have kept appointments not knowing whom they were to meet, with men who did not show up and may have had good reason for not showing up, or bad, or may even have been taken? How often must life itself have not turned on the skill with which overconspicuous strangers did nothing as inconspicuously as possible, awaiting a rendezvous put off by perhaps unreliable messengers, and making do with quotidian ignorance in the principal working convention of the resistance, which was to let no one know any more than he had to. All right. So, I mean, it goes on. So, I mean, by the end, he was awarded the Croix de Guerre, so the Cross of War, and the Medal of the Resistance by the French government. I mean, and
contributing and taking risks.
Really.
Yeah, for sure.
And he started that novel Watt while in hiding, and completed it in 1945, not published until 1953. An extract was published. He spent after the war, he got back to Dublin briefly, and then and it was tricky for him to get out of London. They stopped him and he basically said, look, I've been helping you guys.
Right. I'm on
Like,
your side,
just
man.
ask your guy. Like,
Yeah.
and like literally they went into the, like at customs or wherever,
Yeah.
you know, they went and they looked and it's like, oh yeah, Samuel Beckett, resistance. Like
Right.
he was like, you know, show us your papers.
Right.
He ended up, he worked as a stores manager at the Irish Red Cross Hospital in St. Lo in Paris.
Wow. Okay.
So he like actively contributed during the war as like a healthy, I mean, short of joining,
picking up arms. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he did about as much as anybody could have done. All right. Mm-hmm. And that brings us to the thing that I talked about earlier. I'm going to call it his anno mirabilis, the way that we talk about Einstein's breakout year. Something happened here now for Samuel Beckett, where we've gone from the cricket field, we've gone from the Porter Academy, we've gone through TCD, Trinity College Dublin, all the different women, mid or otherwise. We've been driving drunk half the time, drinking a lot. The writing is very wanky and cerebral. Strokes of brilliance, but it's not all kind of locked in, and it's sort of Joycean. Joyce is dead and gone. Your cousin Peggy is dead and gone. Your uncle is dead. Your father is dead. Your mother is getting older. You've settled into this comfortable relationship with this French woman. You're famous, but in like a literary. Like in literary circles, you're known, not famous.
Not famous,
but but you're known. Yeah, like a small amount of maybe. Yeah, you're known, notable. And it's 1945. The war is winding down. He returns to Dublin. During his stay, he has a revelation in his mother's room. His entire future direction in literature appeared to him. Beckett had felt that he would remain forever in the shadow of Joyce, much like I feel like I will always be in your shadow, Brad. We're more like the characters in Godot. It's Estragon and who's the other one? Vladimir and Estragon. Yeah. Very good.
Estragon.
Okay. All right. Whatever you say. Whatever you
matters.
say. Okay. We can take turns, man. We'll take turns. That would be fun during a live show to wear boulder hats and to come out looking like tramps for no reason. We start juggling. Live show 2024 Detroit. It's going to happen. Okay. So, but this is what he had to say. Beckett had felt that he would remain forever in Joyce's shadow, certain to never beat him at his own game. His revelation prompted him to change direction and to acknowledge both his own stupidity and his interest in ignorance and impotence. I realize
I might be stupid, but I'm going to know more about being stupid than anybody has ever known.
I think it's an incredible reaction to the war because I don't think is there anything in Joyce's work that could have predicted or even spoken to World War II? Really?
I mean, there are hints. There are hints of a technologically aided apocalypse, but it doesn't seem to be I wouldn't say there, and I could very well be wrong. There's so much in Joyce, who knows what's what. I don't know that there's historical specific political predictions about historical trends, but there is a suggestion of like like I said, a technologically guided apocalypse.
I just think it's so interesting that having gone through everything that we've gone through with old Sammy here now, into the war, into the resistance, where he was in like an information officer in the resistance, essentially putting pieces together, maybe certainly not even knowing what the message he was conveying meant. That his response to that and to all his failures in love and to his relationships with his family and his mother and his cousin and all of it, his response is finally, I don't know. And that is literary. And that is the answer to Joyce's overflowing and to Joyce's genius of positivism, genius of expressive totality. Like the whole universe is contained in Finnegan's Wake. Right. That's not my project.
Right.
My project is the unknowing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's
This is what
interesting,
he
and,
said.
there is a way in which the one approach beckons to or implies the other approach, right? There's like that's the contrast that is necessary to reinforce each other almost. Yeah, interesting.
And again, there's an interesting parallel between Catholicism and Protestantism here as well. There's some interesting psychological stuff happening. This is what Beckett wrote. I realized that Joyce had gone as far as one could in the direction of knowing more, in control of one's material. He was always adding to it. You only have to look at his proofs to see that. I realized that my own way was in impoverishment, in lack of knowledge, and in taking away, in subtracting rather than in adding.
Mm-hmm.
Beckett said that there was only one theme in his life, and he spelled it out: to and fro in shadow, from outer shadow to inner shadow, to and fro between unattainable self and unattainable non-self.
Mm-hmm.
And we're getting into some of Frank's stuff here. There's an alternative.
That's interesting. Sorry, there's something in there also about psychoanalysis, and there's something in that statement about ultimately the failure of psychoanalysis, not that the whole enterprise is bunk, but that like all it can do is bring you up to some certain level at which you then must admit that you don't know or can't change. Yeah. Anyway, interesting stuff.
And friend of the show, Frank, goes on. He says there's an alternative take on this one theme of life in the short prose piece Neither, which reads: to and fro in shadow, from inner to outer shadow, from impenetrable self to impenetrable unself, by way of neither.
And
it goes on. In these extremes, Beckett hopes to transcend the binary into a space where purpose of being might be revealed. And although his characters so often inhabit such liminal spaces where enlightenment is anticipated, the result of their pursuits invariably manifests only a shadow of purpose. Nelson argues that Beckett was rejecting the Joycean principle that knowing more was a way of creatively understanding the world and controlling it. In the future, his works would focus on poverty, failure, exile, and loss, as he put it, on man as a non-knower and as a non-canner. The revelation has rightly been regarded as a pivotal moment in his entire career. Beckett fictionalized the experience in his play Krapp's Last Tape. While listening to a tape he made earlier in his life, Krapp hears his younger self say, "Clear to me at last that the dark I have always struggled to keep under is in reality my most." At which point Krapp fast forwards the tape before the audience can hear the complete revelation. Beckett later explained to Nelson that the missing words on the tape are "precious ally."
Interesting. Yeah.
Clear to me at last that the dark I have always struggled to keep under is in reality my most precious ally. Yeah. Very good for Art of Darkness.
Yeah.
All right. Yes. So we have gotten kind of where I wanted to get. And we're gonna talk a little bit about the work here. I've got a bit more from Frank that I want to read. Let's see here. Beckett's subsequent pivot inward and the flooding outward of hitherto suppressed unconscious psychic material leads to what he characterized as a frenzy of writing, which produced his most well-regarded and remembered works: the trilogy, Godot, Endgame, eventually Happy Days, Krapp's Last Tape. The major plays are Godot, Endgame, Happy Days, Krapp's Last Tape, I believe. There may be one more, but the precious ally Beckett had been so sorely missing is therefore revealed in this confrontation with the unconscious. All right. In Krapp's Tape, this dark is cast as an unshatterable association that will not be overcome, or at least transformed into a positive creative force until dissolution of storm and night with the light of the understanding and the fire. A sort of Promethean journey is articulated where the inner darkness, proximity to a condition of deep unconsciousness, the primordial realm, prenatal state, collective womb, the mother's room, are all imbued with a revelatory power of fire and understanding. All right.
Okay. I'm with you.
Yep. Heaviness. And this is something that Frank really wanted me to mention, so I'm going to do it.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see here. So He just says in this paragraph, May's coldness to Beckett in his childhood and perhaps her own incomplete birth, which Beckett makes suggestions at in Footfalls, which I believe is like a later play, seem to be just a couple of myriad factors in the creation of an impassable gulf between them, which was never bridged. No doubt causing in large part Beckett's neurotic fixation on incomplete birth, a return to the prenatal state, and even a conquering of the womb in which the mother is banished. It's I who live there now, he says of vindictive Malloy, writing from his mother's room, from which she is absent. He gives few glimpses into the trauma he shared with or was made to suffer by his mother, but those he does provide a revealing. In the late prose work Company, he writes, looking up at the blue sky and then at your mother's face, you break the silence, asking her if it is not in reality much more distant than it appears. The sky, that is, the blue sky. Receiving no answer, you mentally reframe your question, and some 100 paces later look up at her face again and ask her if it does not appear much less distant than in reality it is. For some reason you could never fathom, the question must have angered her exceedingly, for she shook off your little hand and made you a cutting retort you have never forgotten. Okay.
All right.
So we're getting into this sort of like heavy psychological relationship between May and Sam. She had a violent temper, and as we've seen.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now we're getting into the work. I mean, we've sort of arrived at like the fully realized Beckett, and I want to cover a few more biographical things, and then I want to sort of bring us home. We've got in 1950 his mother passed away. So let me read from this. I'm going back to Damned to Fame. In the early summer of 1950, Beckett's brother wrote to tell him that the Parkinson's disease against which his mother had been fighting for the past few years was gaining ground and that she was deteriorating rapidly. One day she fell, breaking her femur. On hearing this, Beckett rushed over immediately to Dublin, where he found her condition much worse than he had ever imagined. She was taken to a nursing home. Frank had to keep up with their father's business. Beckett, feeling guilty, tried to assume the greater part of the burden for his mother's illness. So he's in the nursing home where her leg was supported by a sling that proved to be most uncomfortable, as it forced her to lie on one side of her body only. But a broken leg was the least of her problems, for the dementia had been brought on by Parkinson's disease, worsened rapidly after her accident. And on July 24th, 1950, Beckett could write that medical opinion confirmed that she was dying. No one, however, would or perhaps could say how long death would be incoming. You could see all these, like how this experience would inform these plays. Most of the time, her mind wanders and she lives in a world of nightmares and hallucinations, he wrote. He was profoundly affected by what he described as the terrible moral and physical distress that she clearly experienced whenever she surfaced from her state of profound lethargy. He sat watching over her for an entire week, leaving the nursing home only when it was absolutely necessary in order to eat, or when he could no longer bear to watch her suffer, to walk disconsolately alone by the Grand Canal. Sitting by her bedside, he longed earnestly yet compassionately that it would soon be all over and done with at last. On those desolate walks, he thought with bitter irony of his own situation, an agnostic who desperately needed a God to blame for the unnecessary nature of his mother's suffering. Yeah.
Yeah. Heavy.
May Beckett died on August 25th, 1950. Afterward, Samuel was exhausted and distraught. He was unable to bring himself even to write to his two good friends for over a week. Then when he did, having announced that at last it was over for his mother, he had to break off, saying that he could write no more. And he felt a tremendous amount of guilt, and he felt very alone when it was done. So he attends the funeral service, and Yeah, it was one of the key features of his aesthetic that what he once described to me as the cold eye had to be brought to bear on a personal experience before it could be used in a work of art. You need time to process this stuff before you can bring it into the work.
Sure.
It was 7 years before he could bring this into Krapp's last tape, where he said, "Mother at rest at last."
Mm.
The house on the canal where mother lay a-dying in the late autumn after her long viduity, with the speaker waiting nearby on a beach by the weir from where I could see her window. Yeah. All right. So he loses his mother in 1950, and he has Godot in 52 and 53. Okay. What do you know about Godot, Brett? Have you seen it? I mean, you've seen it on online, yeah.
I've never seen it staged. I've seen I want to say two different versions of it on film, and I've read it, so I'm fairly familiar with it.
Yeah. I'm gonna, again, in the interest of time, I'm going to just say that everybody listening who's interested in the work of Samuel Beckett should certainly seek out productions of the work. You should have a chance to see a Godot where you are at some point in your life.
And if not, you just wait. If it's not going on right now, you just wait.
Sure. Or again, there are very fine, very good, Brad. I see what you did there. I'm getting into getting into the loopy hour here on Art of Darkness. Been covering a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know that there's been a writer in history who has. This is like the Beatles between Rubber Soul and Let It Be, and Abbey Road here. It's just banger, banger, including the trilogy novels, which are, Godot became a very serious success. He wrote it in French. It was produced in Paris. It was well received. The London production at the Royal Court, I believe, initially the response was a little bit tepid, but a couple of key critics saw it for what it was, and then it was a packed house. Ultimately, Godot would end up on Broadway, and he would make like $500 a week, and it ran for 100 days, which that was a lot of money. Remember, this is that time where, like, if you were a doughboy, dough-fed, farm-raised, corn-fed, Yankee Hemingway type, and you had a bit of money, you could come over and live in Europe. I mean, that the dollar was so strong at that period of time. So Godot made Beckett both like famous and, I don't know, I'm going to say wealthy, but like he had money. He was.
Even not wealthy. If you've got like a regular, reasonable amount coming in, like say you've got X amount of dollars on patreon.com/artofdark, it's just
it helps a lot. Thank you for plugging that. And we really mean it. No, we really mean it. This month of October has been a little slow, so if we could get some new Patreon money coming in this month, that would be awesome. We love you guys, all our listeners, the patrons. You guys rock. But we've got goals. And we're going to keep growing this pod and keep doing these crazy long episodes about some of the greatest artists who've ever lived, including the great Samuel Beckett. I am going to read another bit about kind of the last thread here in the family. Let's see here. At 11 o'clock, this is 1954, after Godot, has sort of had its success. Oh, there was a little bit. There's a little bit here where he had a quick affair with one of the women that were sent over. It says Beckett mixed business with pleasure. In the interest of time, I'll pass by that. But for his character, I want you to know this. And this would sort of never. It would eventually settle down, as it finally has to, but he always kind of had. And by the way, I think in November, there's a Beckett biopic coming out.
There is. Gabriel Byrne's going to play Beckett, I believe. Yeah. So
okay, so you're going to learn more about the mistress in England, Suzanne, and all the rest in that. I hope it's very good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he deserves a good biopic, and there's not that many of good biopics, as we know. So
Biopics are hard.
Yeah.
But this woman was named. I have to get this in because I'm going to come back to it in a little bit. He wrote, "Those were good evenings we had for me," he wrote to Pamela Mitchell. "Eating and drinking and drifting through the streets. That's the way to do business. I'll often be thinking of them, that is, of you." Yeah, she was a 32-year-old American woman, Pamela Mitchell. She came to Paris on behalf of Harold Orem Incorporated in relation to the English language rights of Waiting for Godot. Okay. And then he learned, so she went back, they have an affair. She goes back to New York. Then he learned that she was to come live in Paris. Although he was outwardly enthusiastic, this made things far more difficult for him since he was still living in a fairly small apartment with Suzanne. It was not easy to keep his meetings with the young American woman's secret. Perhaps he did not even try.
Yeah.
He's in Paris with a French woman. We have different rules, but that's also not a great vibe. I mean, I don't know if we put that up against, I don't know what to say about it. Anyway, That's happening. So she stayed in an apartment, then she rented, or stayed at a hotel, then she rented an apartment opposite the hotel where Beckett had lived when he had been stabbed.
Okay. Oh, wow.
And so then they met regularly. They were having an affair, brief, intense affair. Okay. All right. At 11 o'clock one night toward the end of May 1954, Beckett suddenly received a telephone call from Jean with the devastating news that Frank had been diagnosed as having terminal lung cancer. There had been indications of ill health for several months, worryingly low blood pressure and attacks of dizziness, followed by what was thought to be a debilitating attack of influenza, but no suggestion of anything as serious as cancer. Beckett was devastated. So he went back, helped Jean, and he's back in Dublin. And it was not until the middle of August, a month before Frank died, that the doctor admitted there was nothing more to be done. And Beckett would write to Pamela Mitchell, charting his brother's end. This definitely comes out in Endgame. Reading Beckett's own grim account of the slowing down of time in the light of an imminent ending that will not end, reflected in phrases like "things drag on, a little more awful every day, and with so many days yet probably to run, what awfulness to look forward to," or "waiting, not so bad if you can fidget about. This is like waiting tied to a chair, is like being deeply immersed already in the world of Endgame." Are you familiar with Endgame?
I'm not familiar with Endgame, no.
Okay, I will describe Endgame in a bit. Where something slowly but inexorably is taking its course. Finished, it's finished, nearly finished, it must be nearly finished. There's a good version of Endgame in the Beckett on film with David Thewlis is in that one.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. However slowly, the end finally came. His brother died on September 13th, 1954. Beckett stayed on for 2 more weeks to help sort the family's financial affairs. And on his return to France, they bought a country home in 1953 where he would spend a lot of time. And they didn't have a ton of money. And my understanding is this country home was the front yard, or the yard of it was literally on train tracks.
Oh my gosh.
The train would go by, people would wave at them. And like that. It's like Seven. It's like where Brad Pitt's character lives in Seven, something like that. Maybe not quite as intense as that. But
Beckettian set. That's a Beckettian setting too, a little bit, right? You can imagine a little play where the train goes by at crucial moments in the conversation, right? Yeah.
And then this woman that he was having an affair with, this broke his heart. Losing his brother was, as you can imagine, it really broke his heart. At the end of November, he took the decisive step to call it a day, arguing that although he was very fond of her, he did not love anyone. He wrote her, "For me, things must go on as they are. I have not enough life left in me even to want to change them. They may change and leave me alone. I shall do nothing to try and stop that either. The notion of happiness has no meaning at all for me anymore. All I want is to be in the silence. Don't imagine I don't feel your unhappiness. I think of it every hour with misery. For God's sake, admit to yourself you know nothing of me and try and believe me when I tell you what I am. It is the only thing that will help you. You will be happy one day and thank me for not involving you any deeper in my horrors.
Jeez.
And they remained friends, apparently. So they had they corresponded for the next 17 years, infrequently after 1956. They saw each other whenever Pamela was in Paris, and once in 1964 when he went to New York. She described this later friendship as an amitié amoureuse, so a loving friendship. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So, and I think that's rather mature of him, frankly, is like sort of like your brother dies. There's all this misery. You don't want to bring any more misery. Probably Suzanne knows what's going on. Yeah. He just sort of recoiled and then just continued to write fucking bangers.
Right.
Right. Okay. So, and I'm going to blast through the work. I'm going to bring us, I'm going to talk a little bit about Endgame because you don't know Endgame.
Yeah.
And, I'm going to try to bring us into the end here rather rapidly because we've gone on and on, haven't we?
We have.
Is it starting to feel interminable? I hope not.
No. But this is interesting. I mean,
good. We could go on and on.
I know way more about him than I did before. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I'm gonna save some stuff for After Dark, and I think the After Dark's going to go on a bit long if you can hang out for a little bit. Going to be fun. All right. So. Godot becomes a huge hit. I'm going to save the business about Godot in prison for the After Dark as well. Don't let me forget that.
Godot what happened when
he got a letter from Germany saying, Mr. Beckett, we're a bunch of prisoners.
Yeah.
We love waiting for Godot. We are all waiting for Godot. and that meant a lot to Beckett. And that's what I mean about, you maybe don't think about Beckett as like a man of the people.
Right.
You think of it as, high flown, but like.
But who better than prisoners can understand this?
Right. Yeah. Totally a man of the people in his own way. And also like European people, they're just a little more urbane. Like even their prisoners are just, right, they speak multiple languages and they're just different. That's what I mean about like putting him next to Johnny Cash in a funny, weird way. Like Beckett had his moment too, where his play was in prison and people were like, these prisoners were having their lives changed, or at least like feeling recognized or seen, or like there's something speaking to them. And I think that's like a beautiful thing.
Okay. It really is.
In a much-quoted article, the critic Vivian Mercier wrote that Beckett has achieved a theoretical impossibility with Godot, a play in which nothing happens that yet keeps audiences glued to their seats. What's more, since the second act is a subtly different reprise of the first, he has written a play in which nothing happens twice. So an English translation of Godot was performed 2 years later. It was a critical, popular, and controversial success in Paris. It opened in London in 1955 to negative reviews, but the tide turned with positive reactions from Harold Hobson in the Sunday Times and later Kenneth Tynan. That's all it takes over there. If you get like one major critic on side, you're in good shape. If a major critic decides your play is mediocre,
you're done.
It makes it hard.
Yeah,
I can speak to experience there. It makes it hard. You want these guys, you got to get these guys on side. It's still to this day, in America, like a positive review from the Times can guarantee it makes or breaks entire careers. Frankly, and what's sort of crummy is like even the critics will go, well, this kind of sucks that this is the way that it is, but that's the way that it is. So all right, but like anything else, I mean, we read the reviews that he received early on. If he had given up, you and I wouldn't be having this. We wouldn't be doing this episode right away.
Sure.
So
of course.
Never give up. All right. They showed Godot in Miami and it became extremely popular. Big performances in the US and in Germany. It's still a favorite and it's frequently performed. It's often emulated. It's never emulated properly. It's always sort of horrible when it's riffed on. It's like somebody trying to write like Cormac. It's like, okay, you got to find your own thing. So during the 15 years following the war, and not just the war, his own like personal war, he figured something out in this turn, man. He produced 4 major full-length plays: Waiting for Godot, Endgame, Krapp's Last Tape, and Happy Days. These plays are often considered, rightly or wrongly, to have been instrumental in the so-called theater of the absurd. They deal in a darkly humorous way with themes similar to those of the existentialists. All right. Yeah. And Endgame, which I'll talk about, everybody should know all 4 of these plays. Like if you're at all interested in Beckett and his work, you should know these plays. But here's what Endgame is about. Or this is the Wikipedia description.
Yeah.
Absurdist tragicomic 1-act play about a blind, paralyzed, domineering elderly man, his geriatric parents, who appear in trash cans behind this guy.
Yes. Yeah. I actually think I have actually seen this, but go on.
Yeah. And his doddering, dithering, harried, servile companion, which we can relate to, in an abandoned house in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, who mention they are awaiting some unspecified end, which seems to be the end of their relationship, death, and the end of the actual play itself. And that's something I have to talk about real briefly. Every single one of the major plays, at least Endgame, all of them, all of the major plays play with the idea of theater itself. And part of it is, why are we even making theater after this war? The world's ended.
Right.
What are we even doing? Well, I guess we got to be entertained. What are we waiting for? Like a plot, a structure? Like after what we've lived through, there's no hero. There's no protagonist. There's nobody coming to save us.
Doesn't mean anything. It doesn't. Yeah.
I mean, very early in Godot, it's sort of nothing to be done, and then the other character says, "I'm beginning to come around to that opinion," or something like that. And it's like, it's so funny because every line, or not every line, but every few beats, there's like a comment on the theater itself.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like they're winking at the audience. Like that's what the audience is. The audience has nothing to do because there's nothing there. And then that becomes the joke. And once you like get into the humor, it can become this rolling, hilarious thing.
Yeah.
If you get it. If you don't get it, it's interminable and terrible. So it becomes multiple things, and
that's the genius of it. Yeah,
that is the genius of it. Harold Bloom called it the greatest prose drama of the 20th century, Endgame, saying, "I know of no other work of its reverberatory power," but stated that he could not handle reading it in old age for its harrowing, bare bones existentialism. And Beckett himself considered Endgame to be his masterpiece. He refers to it in Krapp's Last Tape, saying he had already written the masterpiece. So Godot probably more frequently performed than Endgame, but Endgame worth knowing. And I like that the image of Oscar the Grouch is like straight out of Endgame. You get a little character pops up out of Beckett loved to put these characters in very limiting physical circumstances. Like in Godot, you have Pazzo and Lucky is on the end of a leash. A very funny name, Lucky. I mean, we got these parents in trash cans. Then in Happy Days, it's this woman who like is trapped up to her waist in the first act, and then trapped up to her neck in the second act. And like it's so dark, and it's also like she's ready for her close up in the second act. It's almost like a weird comment on film and like the way that people are like filmed. All she has to perform in the second act is her head. Very, very heavy stuff. Brad, do you know about the novels, the 3 great novels, Malloy, Malone Dies, and The Unnameable?
Yeah, I honestly, I tried to read them when I was maybe 19 years old, and I could not make heads or tails of them. And I haven't delved into them since, so I couldn't really tell you what the thrust is of them.
Okay, all right. Okay,
they were tough. They were tough. I'm sure I could read them now. I wasn't as whatever mediocre level of sophistication I have now, I had about 1/10 of that in literary terms at that age. And so it seemed incomprehensible to me.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm going to read a little bit here. Beckett began composition of Malloy in his mother's bedroom around the same time he experienced the epiphany, which saw his artistic focus reorient away from the outside world of knowing more and toward the opposite, impoverishment, contemplation of the unconscious, the world within. Of this change, Beckett said, only then did I begin to write the things I feel. That's critical. Malloy is the first and most raw product of the inward shift that followed his epiphany. Psychoanalytically, it can be theorized as so deeply rooted in the unconscious that decades later, Beckett recalled, it did not seem to be from me. The eponymous Malloy, who assumes the roles of both writer and hero of his own narrative, conceives a story of his journey to go and see his mother. The novel opens with the therefore paradoxical statement, I am in my mother's room. It's I who live there now. It's emblematic of the violent ambivalence Beckett seemed to feel toward his mother. And that comes out in Endgame, too. Particularly after her death, Beckett seems to be recognizing in himself and his mother a shared ensnarement in the same cosmic bind, something akin to the incomplete birth Jung articulated in the Tavistock lecture, which we're going to talk about a little bit on the After Dark. So Jung identified this notion of like an incomplete birth, a birth that like somehow wasn't fully realized. You're here physically, but you're not like fully here somehow, I imagine, is something. Yeah. Beckett and Malloy wrote, we were so old, she and I. She had me so young that we were like a couple of old cronies, sexless, unrelated, with the same memories, the same rancors, the same expectations. I called her Mag because for me, without my knowing why, the letter G abolished the syllable ma, and as it were spat on it, better than any other letter would have done. And at the same time, I satisfied a deep and doubtless unacknowledged need, the need to have a ma, that is a mother, and to proclaim it audibly. Often through his characters, mother, son, Malloy, Moran, Watt, not, Beckett presents polarized binaries. And that comes out in Endgame, that comes out in Godot. And then he puts them in intense pressure to create this like thirdness beyond the duality. And you can see that in Godot with the boy. People kind of forget there's a fifth character, but you know, in Godot, there's a boy who shows up. There's a very interesting theatrical move for a play that's that serious to have a child walk into that blasted landscape. What does that symbolize? Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. So yeah, in Malone Dies, which is the second of the two novels, movement and plot are largely dispensed with, though there is still some indication of place in the passage of time. The action of the book takes the form of an interior monologue. Finally, in the Unnameable, almost all sense of place and time are abolished, and the essential theme seems to be the conflict between the voice's drive to continue speaking so as to continue existing, and its almost equally strong urge towards silence and oblivion. Despite the widely held view that Beckett's work, exemplified by the novels of this period, is essentially pessimistic, the will to live seems to win out in the end. Are you familiar with the Unnameable? That it's just like,
no,
it's like a novella. The first 13 pages are like an introduction, okay, in the Unnameable, and that has different paragraphs, and then it goes into a paragraph that is like this long. Like, I don't know how many pages this is, but it's a single paragraph that's 100 pages or more. Okay. So I'm going to read the beginning of this paragraph. Okay. I, of whom I know nothing, I know my eyes are open because of the tears that pour from them unceasingly. I know I am seated, my hands on my knees, because of the pressure against my rump, against the soles of my feet, against the palms of my hands, against my knees. Against my palms, the pressure is of my knees, against my knees of my palms. But what is it that presses against my rump, against the soles of my feet? I don't know. My spine is not supported. I mention these details to make sure I am not lying on my back, my legs raised and bent, my eyes closed. It is well to establish the position of the body from the outset before passing on to more important matters. And it goes on. And this paragraph goes on without breaks for 100 pages.
Wow.
Of this like I, this sort of semi-embodied I. Yeah. And then it concludes this way on the final page.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, right. What's a door doing here? It's the last words, the true last, or it's the murmurs. The murmurs are coming. I know that well. No, not even that. You talk of murmurs, distant cries. As long as you can talk, you talk of them before and you talk of them after. More lies. It will be the silence, the one that doesn't last, spent listening, spent waiting for it to be broken, for the voice to break it. Perhaps there's no other. I don't know. It's not worth having. That's all I know. It's not I. That's all I know. It's not mine. It's the only one I ever had. That's a lie. I must have had the other, the one that lasts, but it didn't last. I don't understand. That is to say, it did. It still lasts. I'm still in it. I left myself behind in it. I'm waiting for me there. No, there. You don't wait. You don't listen. I don't know. Perhaps it's a dream. All a dream. That would surprise me. I'll wake in the silence and never sleep again. It will be I, or dream again, dream of a silence, a dream silence full of murmurs. I don't know. That's all words. Never wake. All words. There's nothing else. You must go on. That's all I know. They're going to stop. I know that well. I can feel it. They're going to abandon me. It will be the silence for a moment, a good few moments, or it will be mine, the lasting one that didn't last, that still lasts. It will be I. You must go on. I can't go on. You must go on. I'll go on. You must say words as long as there are any, until they find me, until they say me, strange pain, strange sin. You must go on. Perhaps it's done already. Perhaps they have said me already. Perhaps they have carried me to the threshold of my story, before the door that opens on my story. That would surprise me. If it opens, it will be I. It will be the silence where I am. I don't know. I'll never know. In the silence, you don't know. You must go on. I can't go on. I'll go on.
Oof. Yeah.
It's just like, whoa. And those are all commas.
Right.
Comma.
Yeah.
All right.
Is a sort of there's a sort of a seizure of like, gosh, there's almost something like, what I don't know. I feel like I'm trying to articulate something that he's purposely made somewhat unarticulable, but like there is like this, you can almost feel like this is a conversation between like a disembodied psyche about life continuing or something, right? Like an argument you have when you're reincarnated in the embryo and you're about to come out and be born again. It's like, I can't do this. Yeah. It's fascinating. It's heavy.
Yeah, it's very heavy. It becomes like pure will. It's like this whole thing is just being held together by the word. And the very final thing that I'm going to read from, the last thing he wrote, it's coming up very soon. We're almost done.
Okay.
Although we will be back on the After Dark for Patreon, because Brad and I go long when we're not going anywhere, when we're waiting for Godot. We make use of our time by doing a podcast called The Art of Darkness. Yeah. All right. So moving on rapidly from the late 50s until his death, Beckett had a relationship with a woman named Barbara Bray. And in this new biopic, I think this is going to figure, she was a widow in her 30s. So she's quite a lot younger than him. She got an age gap. She worked as a script editor for the BBC, and he would write radio plays. I mean, he was a star. He was a celebrity. I mean, and it only took until 1969 for him to win the Nobel. I mean, Nelson, the biographer, wrote of her, she was small and attractive, but above all, keenly intelligent and well-read. Beckett seems to have been immediately attracted by her, and she to him. Their encounter was highly significant for them both, for it represented the beginning of a relationship that was to last in parallel with that of Suzanne for the rest of his life. So he kind of had his English wife and his French wife, although he was formally married to Suzanne. After this period, he sort of like his prose sort of slowed down. He in the 60s, 61, he was married to Suzanne in a secret civil ceremony in England.
After they'd been together all that time,
Yeah, and it had something to do with French inheritance law. Like he wanted to make sure that she would have like his estate. Like there was no ambivalent,
Okay.
So, and again, we know that, he would also see Barbara Bray, and let's see. In a visit to Paris, Bray told Beckett she had decided to move there. That's what it was. So Bray moves to Paris, and that's why he and Suzanne got married. So there could be no, because I guess he was spending time with them both.
Right,
he wanted there to be no,
it's like, you're
no
the number
ambivalence.
one. This is the side. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Which, okay, I don't know. Who's to judge? They have, okay. And there's a play that he wrote just called Play, which may have been inspired by this. And the curtain rises in Play on 3 identical gray funeral urns, about 3 feet tall, and they contain 3 characters. The middle urn is one man, to his right is his wife, and the third urn holds his mistress. Okay.
All right.
Okay. And that was in the early 60s.
So yeah, man, it's all kind of yeah, it's all loosey-goosey. All right.
It's all loosey-goosey. All right. So we're almost done here. In October of 1969, while on holiday in Tunis with Suzanne, Beckett heard that he had won the Nobel Prize in Literature. Oh. And Suzanne called this a catastrophe because he was so private. Mm-hmm. And this is the bit about it. Let me see. All right. He received a
that being an issue. Yeah.
Here's what his friends wrote him. Dear Sam and Suzanne, in spite of everything, they have given you the Nobel Prize. I advise you to go into hiding with affection. And this is what the Academy said. At its session today, the Swedish Academy decided to award you the 1969 Nobel Prize for Literature, and hoping that it would be possible for you to be present in Stockholm on Nobel Day, December 10th, to receive your prize from the hands of His Majesty the King. I want to wish you and Mrs. Beckett welcome and to convey my warmest congratulations. And they also wrote him and said, you don't have to come. And he was perturbed. He saw only too clearly how much his long-term future would be disrupted by the celebrity, in addition to his present peace being shattered.
Yeah.
His reflex response was to go into hiding for as long as it took for the hubbub to die down. Jerome Linden spoke vaguely of the laureate having taken a prolonged holiday, even having gone on a cruise somewhere he knew not where. Once it became clear, however, that Beckett's hideaway was known to the press, Linden in Paris and the hotel manager where they were staying spoke of the Nobel Prize winner having left on an excursion. Next, it was rumored that he had checked into another hotel under a false name. Inevitably, the elusiveness of their quarry served only to make the journalists more and more determined to track him down.
Oh, yeah, right. Because then who gets the scoop? Who gets the...
Yeah, and he eventually accepted it, and somebody had to actually accept the award. And he had this Linden fellow, I believe, going to receive the diploma and gold medal on Beckett's behalf from the 87-year-old king in the Stockholm Concert Hall. Yeah, right. I mean, he gave away the money, apparently.
Did he really?
Yeah, it was worth at the time £30,000, which is no small amount of money.
Yeah.
He gave them some of the money to the library of Trinity College.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. This gift was a repost. Surely I fenced. What is wrong with me? Surely to those 5-6 hours. Yeah. 5 hours. Yeah. To those accused him of insulting his native country. So, okay. So he's getting back a little bit.
Yeah.
All right.
Makes sense.
Yep. Almost in the home. We are definitely in the home stretch here now. Okay. Winding down. He wouldn't, he played this game where he was like, he stayed elusive, he wouldn't give interviews. He would meet artists, scholars, and admirers. He would hang out in the lobby of a hotel in Paris, and where he would have his lunches near Montparnasse, where they lived. and apparently he was very amiable
Yeah.
with people, and he was given a career in the theater.
Right.
Like he could direct anything he wanted,
Sure.
of
Yeah.
of
You
his
let
own,
him
probably
do
other,
anything he wants. Yeah.
more or less, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Throughout the 60s and the 70s, his work started to become even more compact, and the late theater is just like whittled down to bare bones. Like there's a play called Not I, which consists almost solely of, in Beckett's own words, a moving mouth with the rest of the stage in darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And that's 1972. When did Rocky Horror Picture Show start?
That's a good point. After
yeah,
that,
yeah.
I think late
1975.
Okay.
So, so there's an image.
Yeah.
I mean, and
yeah.
and these he was such a genius at words, but also those stage images. Like, what are you going to sit and watch for 90 minutes or for 15 minutes?
Right.
That is like an art piece in and of itself.
Right.
Just so
right.
brilliant. It's sort of that, I guess, visual side of it.
Sure. Yeah.
And he would explore memory. He wrote a very politically charged play for Václav Havel called Catastrophe,
which I didn't know that.
Explicitly about dictatorship. He would write poetry. He was writing ultra terse French poems, with some of them as short as 6 words long. His prose was not, I mean, he really turned to theater and sort of stuck to theater. There's a collection of short prose pieces from 1976 called Fizzles, which I think is great. It's so funny. He's like, you're sort of even confessing, like, I don't know.
It's fizzling.
Yeah. He remained preoccupied with memory. There's an opening phrase in this piece, Company, which is called "A voice comes to one in the dark. Imagine to one on his back in the dark. This he can tell by the pressure on his hind parts and by how the dark changes when he shuts his eyes and again when he opens them again. Only a small part of what is said can be verified. As, for example, when he hears you are on your back in the dark, then he must acknowledge the truth of what is said."
Okay.
So just this, these are themes that obsessed him forever. Loneliness and doom. Finally, getting into the 1980s, he wrote his last work, which I think was written in French. And he wrote this to a friend, and he was in the hospital. And we're coming to the very end here, although there will be more on the After Dark. This is the poem. And I hope everything that we've talked about here through this episode really helps this land. He wrote this to Joe Chaikin, and I want to make sure I know who Joe Chaikin is here. Joseph Chaikin, theater director and actor. All right. So one of his theater colleagues.
Yeah.
This is what he wrote. This poem is called "What is the Word?"
Ooh.
Right? Yeah. What is the word?
Yeah.
83-year-old Samuel Beckett. Here's what he said. What is the word? Folly. Folly 4-2. 4-2. What is the word? Folly from this. All this. Folly from all this. Given. Folly given all this. Seeing. Folly seeing all this. This. What is the word? This. Here. All this. Here. Folly given all this. Seeing. Folly seeing all this. Here. 4-2. What is the word? See. Glimpse. Seem to glimpse. Need to seem to glimpse. Folly for to need to seem to glimpse. What? What is the word? And where? Folly for to need to seem to glimpse. What? Where? Where? What is the word? There. Over there. Away. Over there. Afar. Afar away. Over there. A faint. A faint. Afar away. Over there. What? What? What is the word? Seeing all this. All this. All this here. Folly for to see what? Glimpse. Seem to glimpse. Need to seem to glimpse. A faint, afar, away, over there, what? Folly for to need to seem to glimpse. A faint, afar, away, over there, what? What? What is the word? What is the word?
Whoa. Okay. That's intense. That's I don't really know what to say about that. It definitely like started putting me into something of a trance. Like, oh geez, yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Kind of stands on its own a little bit. A lot of it.
Suzanne died on the 17th of July, 1989, and confined to a nursing home and suffering from emphysema and possibly Parkinson's disease. Beckett died a few months later on the 22nd of December. They were interred together at the cemetery of Montparnasse in Paris, and they share a simple granite gravestone that follows Beckett's directive that it should be any color so long as it's gray. And Barbara Bray, his mistress, died in Edinburgh on the 25th of February, 2010.
Oh, really? Wow.
Really?
Okay.
And she was 20 years younger, baby.
Yeah. Okay.
And that is the life and work of the great Irish poet, novelist, and playwright of the doomed.
Yeah.
Elevated to a status of grandeur.
Nice
Samuel
job,
Barclay Beckett.
Yeah. Thank you.
I hope you all enjoyed that. I hope you enjoyed that, Brad.
I did.
You have a good time?
Yeah, no. That's all stuff I wanted to know. I needed to know this story, and I feel like it's given me insights beyond simply the life of Samuel Beckett. So that was great. Thanks.
Good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, I had really a fun time. I struggled a little bit because you hit a wall with Beckett where you go, man, this is so dour and so difficult and so moody. And it does feel like it's all kind of one note, but that note is so important.
Right. Like, no, it is. It's like his work is a little bit maybe one note, and that's overstating it, but it's also like nobody had ever hit that note before.
Right.
You know, it's makes sense.
And I hope that people who feel maybe depressed or this work has a power to remind you you're not alone. You're living through this human experience that's so it is tragicomic. Our situation is really kind of hilarious. And I think if you can back away a little bit, wrestle with that darkness, wrestle with the suicide stuff, and wrestle with the darkness of like, this is a guy who saw the bookends on either side of our lives, right. the great void out of which we emerge and the great void to which we seem to go. And he just sat there and did not look away.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's very well put. Yeah. Huh.
Samuel Beckett. Well, and we'll come back and we'll talk more about Samuel Beckett. We're going to talk about waiting for Godot in prison. We're going to talk about the Tavistock lectures when Beckett listened to Jung deliver, I think, a series of 5 lectures.
Wow.
We're going to talk about Andre the Giant and old Sammy Beckett going to school.
The wrestling match they had.
Yeah. And then we're going to talk about the Catholic priest who betrayed the one true faith and Samuel Beckett and his coterie. That son of a Beckett. Yeah. Brad, what would he be doing today, man?
Well, see, I had said something earlier about my impression of Beckett's work was that he was constantly like refining it down. It was like distilling down language itself to the point where like he could have a blank page. And I kind of feel like with that last bit of poetry you read, that's indicative of this process getting even further and further down. I think he would get to the point of writing stuff that doesn't have words if he didn't already do that, right? There'd be something.
There are plays that are just stage directions with no dialogue.
Right. That seems, and he might even further distill that down. Yeah,
just like almost getting into like sculpture or performance art or internet sound.
I could see him writing a play that it's sort of like, and this is maybe even a gimmicky, simplified version of it, but like the stage direction is all about how the theater is set up, and then how the experience of walking into the theater is, and then you sit down, nothing happens. And then you leave. Yeah. And in his own work, he was sort of arriving at that. Yeah. But one wonders what, like another 20 years of that career, what does it even look like? It looks almost like a museum piece or some sort of weird performance piece. It's like, very interesting. Yeah. fascinating to think about.
Okay.
Huh. Cool.
I said we're going to give the audience 30 seconds of silence here at the end.
Oh,
that's a very long time.
Yeah. Good luck.
I don't know. All I know is we're leaving. We can't go on. We'll go on to the After Dark for Patreon. Please join us.
Seconds, so that was insufferable.